God isn't dead, he's hiding. They called it the Anubis experiment, a perfectly ominous name for its purpose, temporarily killing people in an insane attempt at contacting God. As it turns out, succeeding was the worst possible outcome for the project, and as their first and only subject, I was able to find the answers we so desperately sought after. 20 minutes would be all I got. One of the more eccentric doctors at the facility had invented a new drug. He explained it as an anti-mitotic intravenous coolant, something to stop my cells from dying. Not that these words meant anything to me. I was clueless, but ever so willing. It sounds crazy, willingly putting yourself so close to the edge of life with no safety guarantee. But after being diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, I was desperate for answers. My body was rapidly deteriorating, taking away parts of myself day by day. I had already lost the use of my legs, and eventually, I'd be unable to feed myself or even breathe. The questions I had about the afterlife would be answered with the help of Dr. Muller, a man resembling more of a Frankenstein character rather than a legitimate medical doctor. He was as eccentric as he was genius, with the promise of answers to the ultimate question, alongside a handsome paycheck. I was quick to sign up. I received a phone call from Dr. Muller himself, only hours after signing up for the experiment, speed never before seen at any regular clinic. He requested that I meet with a psychiatrist who would check out my mental state, weeding out any suicidal candidates and religious nuts. On the day of the experiment, I was hooked up to more cables than I had available skin surface. Various machines I couldn't even begin to understand were set up around me, providing alerting beeps to notify everyone that I was still alive. They would need to preform a craniotomy during the experiment, opening up my skull and prodding around with electrodes to see if there was any activity going on while I was put under. Miller held a small needle with a clear liquid. I thought it funny how I had expected something more obvious to kill me. Perhaps a giant device containing green bubbly fluid that glowed in the dark or something to that effect. As it was, it just seemed a bit anticlimactic. This is going to hurt a lot. This is your last chance to turn back, Miller said, calmly, knowing fully well I wouldn't give up. I had signed all the papers and was fully briefed on the procedure, the discomfort, the rehab, and the time I would spend being put under a microscope, having every aspect of my being investigated. Pain was not something I feared, but dying without answers would be pure torture. But you already shaved my head, I joked. If I was going to die, I wanted my last words to at least be amusing ones. But nobody seemed to share that sentiment. Without further ado, they injected the substance into my arm. The second the liquid entered my veins, it burned like a colony of fire ants had crawled their way beneath my skin. Only a few seconds passed before my heart stopped. A moment of pain ensued, and then darkness. People always talk about the white, blinding light they see during a near-death experience. The ecstatic feeling of peace and being back with loved ones. That's not what I experienced. I simply floated around in an endless void, unhinged from the concept of time and space, not existing, nor worrying about getting back to life. Minutes, days, years could have passed, and after an eternity in the void, I was jolted further into the beyond. Heaven or hell, I had moved onto the wrong side of life. The afterlife took the shape of a dimly lit room. I was standing up wearing the hospital gown I had died in, but my legs functioned again. I could move around on my own, as if my disease never existed. I hadn't walked in over a year, but I wasn't joyful about it. In fact, I couldn't experience any emotion. I simply existed within the endlessly large room, not scared, curious, angry, nothing. My naked feet felt wet as I moved across the floor. I couldn't recognize what it was made of, but it was soft and pulsated beneath me with each step. The way the room lit up was peculiar. There were no identifiable source of light, but everything appeared equally bright, as if each surface was lit up on its own. One spot shined brighter than the rest, a number written on the ceiling: 4,815,162,341. As I moved around, it became clear that the walls and ceiling narrowed in, till the point where it was no larger than a shipping container. In the confusion, I hadn't noticed the singular piece of furniture decorating the place, a bizarre chair made of flesh and bones. In the chair sat a young boy, emaciated, barely clinging onto life. Black tendrils connected him to the surrounding environment, with peristaltic movements surging away from him. The whole place was feeding off the child. Being there and seeing such a weak representation of life almost made me forget that I had just been killed. Yet I was unable to feel anything for the sickly-looking boy. "Hello?" I asked quietly. The child slowly lifted his head towards me. His eyes were wide in a mixture of fear and surprise. "How did you get here?" he asked in a shaking voice. I'm not entirely sure. I think I'm dead." I stuttered back. The words felt unreal as I spoke them. My memory was hazy. I could vaguely recall the experiment I participated in and the lethal injection Miller gave me, but it seemed more like a faint dream than a crucial part of my life. "You're one of them?" he asked nervously. "One of..." I couldn't finish. Somehow he knew what I was about to say. "You're not supposed to be here, they'll find us." He got up from the chair, tearing the tendrils as he broke free, a thick black liquid flowing out from each end. He seemed surprisingly agile, considering he consisted mostly of skin and bone. "We have to get out of here. If you found your way here, then they could have followed you." "What? Wait. Who are they?" "The creators." The boy pulled on my arm. His touch burned through my skin. I could feel the sensation of burning flesh, yet I couldn't feel the pain. Somehow, the imprint looked nothing like the hand that had touched me. It was a strange symbol I couldn't decipher. "Hurry!" We ran straight towards the wall, and as we approached it simply retracted into itself, breaking apart to form a doorway. Like with the tendrils, black goo oozed from the tears. The hallways inside were dark and moist, with barely enough space for an adult to bend over to get through. For each step, and every time I leaned against the walls to support myself, it pulsated, twitching reflexively with my movement. After a short run, we eventually entered a room exactly like the first one, except the number now read 4,815,162,342. "Are we safe here?" "No, but it'll buy us some time." "So who exactly are we hiding from?" "Who are you?" The child looked saddened by my question. "I'm sorry, I did my best to hide you." "Hide me?" "No, all of you, humanity." "What are you talking about?" "Shh." The child listened intently to the hallway we had just emerged from. The living wall was growing back over it, leaving no trace that a passageway had ever existed. "Who are you?" Without answering, the child grabbed my arm again, at exactly the same spot as before. Only this time I could feel the burning sensation flowing through my veins, radiating up towards my neck. I felt joy unlike anything in my actual life. And suddenly I knew what he wanted to tell me. For one moment, I both felt and knew everything. "You are God?" I half-asked, half-stated. "That's just one of the many names bestowed upon me by my own creation, but I am not an infinite being like you believe. Why do you look like a child?" "Perception. Your mind created this form." My mind was racing. I couldn't even begin to process the answer to each question as they poured out of my mouth. What about heaven, hell? Is this the afterlife? The boy laughed. There is no heaven nor hell. That's a fantasy created by humanity. I made you because I believed you could be like me. But the creators had other plans. This is why I've been hiding you for so long. What plans? Because you are nothing more than slaves. And as soon as you've finished your time on Earth, you are used as spare parts so that the creators can exist in a physical form. They are so powerful, but wish for nothing more than to just live and feel everything that comes with being human. They need both your energy, which you've creatively called a soul, and the remains. But I've been able to keep at least your energy hidden. How? By destroying it before it could reach me. I'm not sure how you got here. Maybe it's simply not your time, or maybe someone sent you here on purpose. But before I could keep my questionnaire going, I was interrupted. No more questions until you answer one of mine. That statement stopped me in my tracks. What could God possibly need to know from a nobody such as myself? How did you get here? There was an experiment. Some doctor injected me with a drug that temporarily kills me. Why would you agree to that? They wanted me to find God. They wanted to find you. You fool, that's a horrible mistake. How could you not see? Anger and disappointment lit up in his eyes, burning through my soul like raging fire. The shame and self-loathing it awoke in me was unprecedented. I didn't have to ask more questions. The information was being forced into my mind, unrelenting amounts of knowledge occupying my every thought. Despite being dead, the pain was still ever so real. God showed me the face of the creators. He showed me what they do with us after we die. They take what remains, our souls, our flesh, and it allows them to temporarily walk among us on earth, disguised as friends, co-workers, politicians, and doctors with a penchant for obsessive experiments. Do not tell them anything, would be the last words he ever spoke to me. No sooner had he spoken these words, before something jolted me away, pulling me back through the void with incredible force. And before I could process what was happening, I awoke with a gasp in my own body, lying in a hospital bed back in the real world. "You're awake," Dr. Miller exclaimed in joy as he saw me open my eyes, though I hadn't been dead long, 19 minutes to be exact. The experiment put me into a coma for 3 weeks following the injection. I didn't speak, just kept my mouth shut while I tried to figure out if it had all been just a vivid nightmare. They did all sorts of cognitive tests during the next couple of days, making sure my brain hadn't melted due to the 19 minutes of death I experienced. Whatever their machines did, they detected a lot of activity while I was under, things they wouldn't see in an average dead individual. For weeks after my physical health was established, they prodded and asked for anything. But I did as the child had told me. I kept silent, only providing unimportant details about what I saw. I told them there was a light, that I felt at peace, and all the other mumbo-jumbo people say at a near-death experience. Eventually they gave up and sent me home, telling me they would stay in touch, and to call if I could remember anything useful. Until I got home, I could be sure whether the whole ordeal had been a creation of my own dying mind, or if it had truly happened. But one thing I brought with me back from the afterlife was the ability to walk. There's no cure for ALS, but somehow my body had healed, a fact that didn't remain hidden for long. The miracle of regaining my ability to walk, and all quickly gained some media attention. So I took what little money I saved up and started running, hoping that they, the creators, wouldn't find me. The only way to get away from them is to die, to let God destroy my soul. A year ago, I would have happily killed myself to escape whatever torture they have ready for me. But death has become a terrifying concept, because I know there's nothing left for us on the other side.
The hotel. The Broughton Palace was perhaps the nicest hotel I had ever stayed at. Dozens of floors, casinos, buffets, an Olympic-sized swimming pool, and it even had a massive arcade. Just one of the many perks of this sweet-ass job. I thought to myself, I was hired by this marketing firm, Loomis Company, due to my past work as a war photojournalist. It wasn't a career shift I necessarily expected, but the morbid affairs of war and American politics took their toll on my psyche, and my shrink recommended something tamer to offset the years of depravity I saw firsthand. To my surprise, it didn't take long to find this new job. In fact, it found me. The people who hired me were chomping at the bit to get me into their ranks, saying that they specialized in scouting popular locations with hidden morbid histories or something like that. Apparently, there was a huge ghost hunting craze happening on cable TV, and Loomis Company was responsible for finding the few locations left that hadn't been visited to death by paranormal investigators. Personally, I found the paranormal to be bullshit. I had full confidence that the true hell was on Earth, but it was a surprisingly well-paying job that had the full support of my therapist, so I accepted it almost immediately. Plus, with benefits like traveling and staying in 4-star hotels like the Broughton Palace. You can't beat that. I walked through one of the many automatic glass doors, having already given my very sparse luggage to the bellhop to take to my room. Even the lobby was magnificent, with multiple cafes and lounges and a clear view of one of the casinos. I approached one of the women behind the check-in desk, the lines non-existent as it was the middle of the week during the off-season. Yes, I have a room reserved through Loomis Company. The name should be Joseph Harvey, I informed the well-dressed lady as I rummaged through my wallet for the necessary credentials. She held up her hand and smiled brightly. "Oh, no need, Mr. Harvey. We've been expecting you," she replied in an ominous tone. I froze, my blood running cold. "Excuse me?" The woman laughed. "I didn't mean to put you on edge, Mr. Harvey. The whole staff knows why you're here, to help us establish Broughton Palace as a haunted hotspot for TV, right?" I laughed in return. "Yeah, of course. Sorry, I wasn't expecting everyone to know why I'm here." "Oh, we're all very excited, to be honest. This place is filled with all sorts of ghost stories that the staff is dying to share with you. But rest assured, we'll let you settle in and enjoy the non-ghostly commodities the Broughton Palace has to offer. The night staff especially will give you the best experience." The woman chuckled, and with that she gave me a selection of different cards that allowed me to gamble at the casino with money provided by the hotel, a buffet card to get food, and of course my room card. I was on the 18th floor in room 1883. By no means was it a penthouse. In fact, I was a bit disappointed that the room was more reminiscent of a standard hotel room. 2 beds, a TV, microwave, the basics. I quickly got over my disappointment, however, as the commodities certainly made up for the lackluster room. It also had a gorgeous view of the coast that was less than a mile away from the hotel. Since I had arrived only a few hours after noon, I had plenty of daylight to burn, so I went to use my new cards extensively. The casino treated me well at first, with a few machines allowing me to win big before taking it all away, which was par for the course in my prior gambling experiences. This led me to the arcade, where I found my casino card also worked, and spent a ridiculous amount of time playing crane games and shooters. My growling stomach then directed me to the massive buffet, where I tried all sorts of different meats from the separated regional dishes sections, with their angel hair pasta being especially exquisite, finishing just in time for the night to begin to fall and drowsiness to creep into my skull. Noticing the amount I ate and the slight layer of fat beginning to form in my stomach, I opted to take the stairs for some exercise before I took a short nap. As I entered the bottom of the stairwell, I noticed how empty and, well, haunting it was. I pulled out one of the cameras that I had brought with me and snapped a few pictures. I had taken a few earlier, but there honestly wasn't much to document other than some sad old people losing their money in the casino. So I mainly just grabbed some location shots earlier. The stairwell was giving me a completely different vibe, however. For the first time since arriving, I felt a little creeped out, and this aura of sadness filled the air. I snapped a bunch of pictures of each new floor, mostly as an excuse to give myself a breather. And when I reached floor 18, I took a few more. I turned quickly to go through the door and get back to my room, and more importantly, my bed for a nap when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I twisted back around with the astounding sight of nothing causing me to chuckle to myself. All this damn haunted shit making me see things, I thought aloud, shaking my head. I could have sworn I saw a figure crouching at the top of the stairwell, but it was only for a split second that it couldn't have possibly been anything but the trick of the brain. I walked through the door out of the stairwell, ignoring the quick, odd sucking sound that reminded me of sobbing as just the creaking of the door. Before I could make it to my room, however, I spotted a maid exiting from my door. She was fairly short and young, maybe a year or two younger than me, with bright blue eyes and brown hair. Normally, I would have been a bit irritated as I didn't request house cleaning, nor had I been in my room long enough to cause a mess. But her cute appearance distracted me from that fact. "Oh, Mr. Harvey. My apologies, we just wanted to make sure your room was in tip-top condition for the duration of your stay here. I'll get out of your hair," she squeaked in an almost timid manner. "Does everyone here know my damn name?" I thought, but put a kind smile on my face. "Don't worry, I understand. I'm just going to take a nap for a bit before I do my interviews for the night," I reassured her, walking past her to my door. "Do you have any stories you'd like to share later tonight?" I asked as I swiped my card and placed my hand on the handle. Her eyes lit up. "Oh yes. I've had some creepy experiences here. I'll be working on a problem in 1693 if you need to find me later tonight. Besides, it's better that way anyways, there's still daylight left. Stories like that are best experienced at night. My name is Liz, by the way," she replied giddily. I smirked at her in turn. "I'll be looking for you first then, Liz." The maid giggled some more as she winked and waved by at me as I closed my door. Ah, my bed at last. I thought as I face planted into the mattress, looking up only to set my alarm on my phone for 2 hours, and almost immediately drifted away into sleep. Nightmares typically don't follow you into the real world, so after I awoke from a troubled sleep, I naturally felt my ordeal was over. I didn't normally suffer from night terrors, but I had seen some horrific shit documenting war, so it was only natural that I had them on occasion. My mouth was dry as shit and tasted about the same, so I groggily emerged from my warm bed and headed towards the bathroom. During the process of relieving myself, I yawned, trying to understand why the feeling of dread still had yet to leave my body. A rustle from behind the shower curtain drew my attention, but after quickly yanking it back, revealed nothing. I chuckled to myself, turning to face the mirror right as it exploded. It happened so swiftly I could hardly process it, save for shielding my face with my arms. I slumped back, groaning in pain, but thankfully most of what hit me was embedded in my forearms. However, the horror that stepped through the broken remains of the mirror almost made me wish that the glass had blinded me. He was me, or some sort of demented version of me, emaciated with gore caked around the numerous mouths that peppered his body. I would have thought them to be tattooed if not for their incessant gnawing at the air. The false me leered from behind his wall of thick black hair, the only non-horrific difference between us. Besides the gnashing of teeth, the false me made no noise even when his bare feet walked across the broken glass. The closer he crept, the stronger the fear that gripped my body in place held, until he was right in my face, the numerous mouths on his upper body and head licking their lips. 2 of his macabre hands wrapped around my neck, and only then did the pain of the jaws and his palms chewing on my throat shock me into action. Grabbing a large glass shard and jamming it into his stomach and twisting, the false me immediately let go, and his dozens of mouths screamed in anguish. "Hurt me. Hurt me." I didn't bother to wait for his retaliation. I kicked the false me in the stomach, simultaneously driving the glass deeper into his stomach while also knocking him back, freeing me. I rushed out of the bathroom, ignoring the small glass fragments now embedded in my soles. With my eyes still locked on the bathroom entrance, I thrust my hand into my camera bag. It turned out to be a wise decision to keep watch of the bathroom. The false me crawled out, his bones snapping into place as he stood up, his numerous mouths back to their fervent gnashing. He launched himself at me, hands open to take another bite out of my neck. Bang. The shot rang out, and the bullet knocked the false me off course, causing him to crash into the spare bed. Before he could recuperate again, I forced my gun into the main mouth on his head and blew his head off. I waited for a moment, holding the gun to the center of his chest in case he resuscitated once more. But none of his mouths were moving, and after I was satisfied he was dead, I fell back onto the floor, horrified. What the fuck? What the fuck, eh? I cried to myself, unable to process the situation. I felt like I was thrust back into the middle of some sort of battle, but instead of the sidelines, I was the combatant this time. However, I forced myself to regain as much composure as I could. I quickly changed into fresh clothes and pulled the glass from my feet and arms, treating them quickly and likely poorly. But I felt my room was no longer safe to dwell in. However, after attempting and failing to call anyone on the phone, I had a growing fear that this may be true for everywhere in the hotel. With fresh clothes and bandages wrapped around my arms and feet, I slung my pack over my shoulder and counted my bullets. The Glock 17 was true to its namesake, and since I kept it fully loaded, I still had 15 to spare. I sucked in a deep breath and slowly opened my door, my gun at the ready. My assumption was correct, as a simple look into the hallway confirmed that whatever was happening wasn't contained to just my room. Entrails and other assorted gore covered the walls, and the hallway looked far more decrepit than it had before. I nearly retched at the steaming piles of apparently fresh innards that surrounded me, pulling my shirt over my nose in an attempt to block out the smell. Suddenly, a blindingly fast figure pushed past me, nearly knocking me on my ass. I quickly regained my composure, nearly fully stepping out to see what the hell just ran past me. But there was no need. It came back to me. Every ounce of my being was needed not to make a sound as a being with the appearance of an impossibly tall man crouched down by my door, sniffing the entrance. He was obviously blind, as he didn't have the upper part of his head. It was as if it was a clean cut right above the nose, and strangely enough, a large plumage of brightly colored feathers replaced the top of his head. I slowly raised my gun but hesitated to pull the trigger. This thing was thin and gangly, and was obviously attracted to sound, so the gun would either work really well or backfire completely, which was not a risk I was about to take. The feathered man kept sniffing, the feathers on his flat top head rustling occasionally when his face came close to my body. "Gloria? Gloria dear, where are you?" A shaky voice called out, snapping the feather man's attention down the hall, as well as mine. One of the old folks I had seen earlier in the casino had wandered out of his room, a feeble old man using a walker to move around. The feather man at first didn't leave his spot at my door, leaving me helpless in turn to warn the old man and prevent him from making any more noise. "Gloria? I don't like these decorations, they scare me." "Gloria?" he kept calling. The feathered man tilted its head, a grin forming on its pale face. I watched as nothing more than a useless bystander as the old man shakily pulled out his glasses from his nightgown, a look of pure horror spreading across his face as his gaze fell upon the decapitated head of an older woman, who I could only deduce as Gloria. Lord in heaven above, no Gloria. And with that final utterance of his love's name, the feather man was upon him. It was a terrifying sight, as even despite being severely hunched over, the feather man was easily faster than any Olympic sprinter. With one blink, the monster was in front of me. The next, he was lifting the screaming old man. I went to aim my gun, but when I noticed the other side of the hallway, the one which turned a corner and led to the stairwell, was free of any danger, I knew what was the smart choice. However, I couldn't look away from the sight that was unfolding before me. The feather man wasted no time with the old man. "Please God, Jesus, our Lord and Savior," the old man prayed as the feather man wrapped his massive hands around the geezer's head, its smirk growing ever wider. The old man continued praying as the feather man's throat began to bulge, and then his mouth widened as a horrendous-looking peafowl creature emerged from its unhinged maw. It was only the head and neck of the bird monster, and it looked to be some unholy combination of a vulture and peacock. The bird twitched its head, and then the hands of the feather man pried open the jaws of the crying old man, and with one more twitch, the peafowl slammed its beak down the old man's throat and ripped out his tongue and vocal cords. The feather man let the corpse fall to the ground before kneeling beside it, allowing the bird to feast on the body further. As the monster gorged itself, I slowly started towards the corner, away from the gruesome sight. A sigh nearly escaped my mouth as I turned the corner, but I was thankfully able to quiet myself. The door to the stairwell was completely unimpeded, so I carelessly went to grab the door handle to push it open, slipping on an intestine that was strewn across the carpet. My finger instinctively squeezed the trigger of my gun. My brain was able to operate quickly enough after the explosion of sound, twisting my body around to fire off 1, 2, 3, 4 rounds at the body of the feather man, who had already cleared the corner and was mere feet away. I was about to unload the rest of my bullets into the monster when I noticed he had stopped, sniffing the doorway again, feathers ruffling in agitation. That's when I put 2 and 2 together. It didn't seem to be able to leave the hallways. I wasn't too keen on testing that hypothesis, but circumstance forced my hand. Quietly, I shut the stairwell door, and surprisingly, the feather man didn't react. A massive wave of guilt washed over me when my assumption was proven correct. I could have saved that old man. Through the vertical rectangular window, I watched the feather man leave the door and wander back up the hallway, and I slammed my arm against the wall. Fucking coward. I growled at myself through gritted teeth, wiping away my tears. The whole situation had been fucked, and that monster wasn't even dead. I may have been firing blindly, but I did manage to hit it 3 times, as I saw the impact marks on its body. But that abomination didn't even care and must have only barely noticed. The horrors continued as I made my way down the stairs, as a chubby young black man lay sobbing against the wall. But when I went to help him, he turned to face me, displaying his slit-open wrists with his veins still pumping blood. Why? Why did she leave me? Was I not good enough? He wailed, but I pushed him off me and hurriedly made my way down to the ground floor. Just as I was about to enter the main lobby, the wails of the sobbing man quickly filled my ears again, as well as a sickening splat. The splash of a warm substance on my back confirmed my suspicion, so I did not turn around. I rushed through the lobby, everything a twisted version of what I had seen earlier in the day. The reception lady I spoke to when I had arrived was no longer alone. Her head was affixed to a stake, as well as numerous other female attendants, and they were being operated like puppets by some grotesque beast that appeared to be made up entirely of snake tails with no head or body in sight. Enjoying your stay, Mr. Harvey? Would you like to check out? You have all you need in your hand there. The head of the receptionist laughed, the mass of snake tails jostling her bloodied head in order to mime her mouth moving. I looked down at my hand at my gun and realized what the head was implying. Instead of complying, I flipped her off and debated shooting at the disturbing sight, but decided to save the bullets. However, my original plan of walking out the front doors was immediately dashed as I peered through the glass doors and massive windows of the lobby. I couldn't see anything of the outside world. What appeared to be dirt and rock blocked all ground level exits. No, 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 no. I screamed, slamming a chair against the glass. It busted as expected, but my hopes of the buried state of the ground floor being an illusion were crushed. It felt real, and there was no way I could dig my way out. The row of heads behind the reception counter did nothing but laugh at my vain attempts, and in frustration I ran to one of the closest casinos. This proved to be a poor decision, as the casinos were not spared the hotel's hellish makeover. The machines were still brightly colored, but wires and tubes sprouted from them, and had plunged themselves deep into their patrons' skin and orifices. As I spun around in horror, I realized this was not to kill the people they had captured, but rather to sustain them as they were forced to continue playing their games. The players would cry and struggle as their blood and organs were taken as payment for a game, and the slot machines would pump them full of some strange blue liquid that appeared to sustain their captives. The slot machines were also scuttling around like massive insects, and 3 began approaching me with their tubes and wires whipping around like tendrils. I fired off 3 shots into the machines as I darted away, and 2 of them powered down as the bullets pierced their screens. I sprinted down another hallway and stumbled into the dining area, where the macabre sight of human gore, fingernails, severed animal heads, and squirming maggots filled the buffet area, along with other foul things that made me vomit. A waiter with the lower half of a millipede was scuttling around, fixing himself a plate of horrific obscenities when he noticed me and smiled brightly, his mandibles spilling out of his mouth. "Ah, Mr. Harvey, here for seconds. I could tell you really like that angel hair pasta." He laughed, pulling a human scalp with blonde hair from a pile of scalps at the buffet. I retched again, only this time I felt something odd in my throat, and pulled a long mass of blonde hair out of my throat, a small chunk of meat still attached at the bottom. The millipede waiter laughed some more as I violently threw up any remnants of what was left in my stomach, but his laughter was cut short when I put a bullet through his head, causing his body to lurch over, sending his face into a pile of maggots. I quickly exited the buffet, trying and failing to return to any sort of composure. I had no fucking clue on what to do when a realization hit me. The roof. I recalled glancing out my window when the false me had attacked, and the view was the same as before, meaning there was a chance only the ground floor was buried. If I could make it to the top and gauge how deep the lower floors are buried, I just might have a chance of getting out of this hotel. I opted for the elevators this time as I wasn't keen on seeing the aftermath of the stairwell man's jump, and surprisingly they seemed normal. That is, until I stepped into one and the walls, floor, and ceiling began throbbing, and large, white teeth emerged at the doors. I had walked into a mouth. Before I could act, I was thrust upwards into a fleshy throat and blacked out. I awoke some time later to pleasant humming, and as my eyes fluttered open, I gazed upon yet another horrific sight. The room must have originally been just another standard hotel room, but it had been cleared out for numerous small and few large torture devices. The main attraction was a massive torture rack, simple in its design but effective in its purpose, as I watched the current occupant's right arm slowly get ripped off as he screamed for mercy. His torturer was unsurprisingly another horrid being, but a familiar one, wearing a very revealing dominatrix getup, and walking on nothing more than unnaturally long and exposed broken leg bones was Liz, the maid I had run into earlier. Hearing me stir, she turned in my direction and smiled, kicking a lever on the rack behind her, and releasing the tortured corpse to fall to the ground. Mr. Harvey, or should I say Joseph. After all, we are about to get to know each other on a far more personal and intimate level. She purred, moving closer to me with more elegance than one could assume possible on the shattered broken bone. It was like she was weightless, and the two bones protruding out of the ragged flesh of her exposed legs never seemed to be a hindrance. How did I get here? I asked, straining against my restraints. I was tied down to a bed with string, and she tapped her fingers along my chest, her nails long and caked with blood. I also noticed the string was weak. You made a promise to me, Joseph, to interview me, and the hotel held you true to that. It deposited you here, right outside this room, while I was cleaning up for another guest of ours. He was quite messy, so I needed to speak with him personally, she explained, nodding to the naked corpse on the floor by the rack. That's when I noticed my gun and bag on the floor near the bathroom, and a plan formed in my head. I decided to keep Liz talking. What happened to you? To this place? I asked, squirming slightly as she leaned on the bed with a smirk, basically laying her head on my stomach. Joseph, you already know the answer. It's the whole reason you came. The Broughton Palace is haunted, so obviously you want the best haunted experience you can get, right? She giggled, just barely digging her nails into my gut. But this is real. Why is it real? Because authenticity is the best, and the Broughton Palace provides. Now, let's get started. We've wasted most of the night already. Before she could finish, I launched my knee up, crashing it straight into the side of her head. With all the strength I could muster, I yanked both hands free, tearing through my skin but ultimately freeing myself. I grabbed Liz by the head and kneed her again, this time in the face, and shoved her into the side of the wall as I hopped off the bed and grabbed my bag and gun, checking to make sure my ammo was still there. I turned to face the now bloodied and very pissed Liz, who noticed the gun in my hand. You don't have enough bullets, she snarled and launched herself over the bed to pounce at me. 2 bullets went into her before I dashed out into the hallway, and when I slammed the door behind me, I saw her getting back up. Strangely enough, however, when I made it back to a stairwell entrance, she wasn't following me. I then noticed the floor number I was on, 16, and my mind refocused on my original goal, the roof. So I sprinted and ran as hard as I could up flight after flight of stairs. I saw the chubby black man a few more times, but he seemed harmless, only wanting to beg for answers as to why and take a dive to the ground floor, only to show back up again a few floors up. I even caught a glimpse at other monsters that looked like the feather man through those small stairwell door windows, sniffing about for their next victim. Eventually, I made it up to the top of the hotel, and after crashing through the door, I was greeted with a typical coastal city night sky. The town below was still glowing with lights from numerous bars and other stores still open. Cars moved up and down the streets occasionally. The bottom of the Broughton Palace even looked normal, with the lobby entrance definitely above ground. No, what the fuck? I stammered, staggering back as I ran towards the stairwell door. I darted inside and looked down the immense flight of stairs. And sure enough, the chubby black man was only a few flights down. He looked up at me, blood gushing from his arms. "Why?" he called up. "Fuck," I shouted as I stormed back out onto the roof and lifted my gun into the air, firing all but one round into the night sky. Leaning against the side of the building, I started sobbing. Those bullets were my penultimate solution. A desperate attempt at maybe attracting the local authorities to my location and saving me from this hell. But I should have known it wouldn't be that easy. Glancing out into the dwindling night sky over the coast, I noticed something, or rather three somethings. At first, it was only slight ripples in the water, but as daylight began to creep over the horizon, so too did three massive, solid back obelisks. Each one was identical, and each one had about 100 feet between them. I did not know what they were, nor their purpose, but the mere sight alone of them filled me with more dread than anything that had occurred during the night, as if they were composed of pure terror and fear and seeped that energy to any who dared look upon them. I weakly lifted my gun and fired the last bullet in their direction, and when nothing happened, I crawled up onto the edge of the hotel roof. The sun had almost fully risen, and the obelisks were almost at the beach. I did not want to see what horrors they would bring upon the world. So I took one look back at the hotel before sauntering off the edge, plunging 34 stories to the ground below. Screams and shouting filled my ears almost as much as the incessant ringing, as well as some unfamiliar voices. "Jesus Christ, someone call an ambulance." "Did he jump?" "Yeah, right off the fucking roof, he should be dead." "Jesus Christ." A familiar voice appeared. "Everyone please back away, medical officials will be here shortly to move him to a hospital." It was the receptionist. She should have been dead. That's when my eyes finally opened, and I saw what was left of my mangled body. My legs were practically a red paste. One arm had practically broken off due to the impact, and the other one was somewhere twisted under me. Tough enough. I tried to speak, but only broken teeth, blood, and a piece of my tongue came out. The receptionist looked down at me worriedly, shooing the small crowd away as an ambulance pulled in. She crouched down beside me, smiling as the EMTs hurried in our direction. In an almost inaudible whisper, she leaned in and said, "I hope you enjoyed your stay at the Broughton Palace." Lives in the balance. Have you ever bargained with a ghost? We're going to. We're not supposed to be here, but none of us could resist the chance to sneak into the Durgee house on Halloween. At 3 a.m. no less. It helps that Alex's father is the caretaker. All Alex had to do was filch the keys from his dad's desk. That was his part of the deal. The rest of us brought what we could up to the attic: flashlights, flameless candles to avoid a fire hazard, a stool, and a noose. Yeah, you heard me right. A hangman's noose, pre-tied according to a TikTok tutorial. Brandon volunteered to do that. As obsessed with death as he is, it's no wonder. I'm Kara. I know the background of this place and the man who lived in it. In fact, a member of our town's historical society gave me a gift, an antique that will serve us well. And Delia, our fearless leader, knows how to conduct business at this hour. She turns on the white flameless candles and places them in a circle around the stool. Then Brandon turns on his flashlight, climbs up on the stool, throws the noose over a rafter beam, and secures it. It figures he'd know how to do that too. He clambers down. "All right," says Delia. "Let's do this." She turns her flashlight on, illuminating her face but leaving the rest of her in darkness. It reminds me of someone telling ghost stories by a campfire. She's not that far off. Rule number 1, no phones.
We can't get reception up here anyway. Rule number 2, no making any loud noises or sudden moves. Rule number 3, no standing in front of the window or shining your flashlights through it. Rule number 4, no fucking around. Rule number 5, no fun, quips Alex. Brandon snickers. Shut up, we have work to do. She gestures toward me. Kara, did you bring the scales? Sure did. Take them out of your backpack, but only when I tell you. I brought the knife. Alex clicks his flashlight on. What? I also brought a sewing pin, if you'd like to use that. Delia gives him the side eye. We're drawing blood? Wait a minute. You only told us about the noose. Sup with that? Asks Brandon. We're conducting a binding ritual, so blood will be involved. I feel faint already, says Alex. Look, do you want to do this or not? Hell yeah. Speaking of hell, says Brandon, are we selling our souls to Satan? No. I click my flashlight on. We're dealing with a ghost, the spirit of Albert Durgee, our county judge in the late 1800s. He hanged several people. 4 of them were innocent. How do you know that? From historical records. I've done a lot of studying. Durgee felt so guilty about executing those 4 that he hanged himself in this attic, hence the noose and the scales. The scales were his prized possession. He kept them on the bench where he presided. I reach into my backpack to pull them out. Not yet, Delia interjects. Tell us some more about the victims. 2 men and 2 women, Ronnie Albright, Catherine Bradshaw, Zeb Comstock, and Emily Dawes. 3 alleged murderers and 1 alleged horse thief. They hanged folks back then for grand theft stallion. In all 4 of these cases, Judge Durgee made a mistake. A miscarriage of justice. That's what this ritual is going to try and fix, for a price. Our blood, grumbles Alex. Just a few drops. And your greatest desire weighed against your greatest confession. Huh? Delia sighs. In words of 1 syllable, what do you wish for? What have you done wrong? Tell us, and tell the ghost. If he thinks you're not so guilty, he'll keep the brass scales balanced. He'll let you go and free you from the noose. He'll also grant your wish. However, if he sees your guilt and tips the scales 3 times, you die. Do you still wish to proceed? That's 2 syllables. Oh yeah. Brandon puts his flashlight up to his face. So who's going first? How about you? Asks Delia. You're the one who loves to talk about anything morbid, so why don't you put your money where your mouth is? I will after you do. What the? All right. Kara, the scales, I take them out of my backpack and present them to her. She removes a steak knife from her pack and pricks her finger with the tip of it. She holds her finger above the left weighing pan. 3 drops of blood fall into it. Hold it steady while I put pressure on my finger and climb up on the stool. I watch as Delia does so, and slips the hangman's noose over her head. She then takes the scales from me and waits for them to balance. Now then, it's critical that you all stay silent while I call on our late guest. She clears her throat. A restless soul now summon we of a Judge Albert Durgee, for he's slated for to die. Unquiet does his spirit lie. The ones he sentenced to the noose we call upon, to set us loose from the guilt that binds us fast, and grants us one wish at long last. What we confess shall all be true, or we'll pay the proper due, serving for eternity with the judge, though dead we be. Cool poem, bro, says Brandon. Shut your face. There's more. After a tense moment, Delia goes on. Judge Durgee, hear and heed us well. Thou art between heaven and hell. Judge us rightly. Hear our plea. Grant us boons and saved you'll be. Judge us wrongly, and you'll take one more step toward a fiery lake. The 4 you hanged will take the stand along with us at our command. If you condemn us, this you'll rue. There are lives in the balance. Your soul is too. Goosebumps spread over my body like a 10-second plague. I am Delia Simon.
I pledge upon the life of Catherine Bradshaw. I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me, Your Honor. The flameless candles flicker more brightly. I want my parents to get divorced. They're at each other's throats every day, and I'm sick of it. They claim they're staying together because of me, but I'm 16 years old. I don't need to be coddled. I know what's what. Are they all fighting over money and old affairs? That's not my fault. Neither is they insulting each other almost constantly. They should just get it over with and part ways. They don't want to split up their assets between them, however. Theft. No movement from the bloodied balance. One thing they agree on is me getting the best grades. I need to be valedictorian. They don't know I cheat. Once upon a time I didn't need to, but now I have too many rivals. Lindsay Peterson, Brad Bard, Vani Acharya, and those are just the top 3. I'm 5th in our class. Not even on the podium. Whoever paid attention to a 5th place loser, she visibly trembles. The stool creaks beneath her. That's why I download most of my papers online and pay other students to do the rest. You'd be surprised how far $200 will go for kids who are smart but poor. Just as hungry to succeed too. Hemph. You call that a confession? Brandon sneers. Alex and I shush him. Your Honor, I wish I could tell you I'll stop cheating if you release me and grant my wish. But that would be a lie. It's just so easy, even with harsh anti-plagiarism rules in my classes. Besides, I have more shit to do than write a 1,000-word essay on Macbeth. I have a job, my friends, and my family. A life. School takes that away from me. The scales tip, lowering the pan with the 3 drops of Delia's blood. Oh, come on. You don't think that what I've done is all that bad, do you? No answer. I get it. Strike 1. Remember Catherine Bradshaw? Kara knows more about her than I do, so I'll let her remind you. I swallow hard. My mouth's gone dry. Catherine's husband cheated on her. She called him out. They fought and they tried to strangle each other. Self-defense was her argument, but you didn't buy it. You executed her instead. I know most people in the 19th century weren't feminists. But why didn't you sentence her to life in prison? You had a serious beef with women, a friend, Your Honor. Agreed, says Delia. Well, that's all I've got. What's your verdict? Guilty or not guilty? The scales in her hand rebalance. Thank you, Judge Durgee. See you in court. Divorce court. Delia smiles wryly, slips her head out of the noose, and climbs down from the stool. She hands the scales back to me. I wipe the bloody pan off with one of the Kleenexes I always carry. Who's next? Me. Alex shines his flashlight on his face. I can do better than that. It's not a competition, says you. He pricks his finger on Delia's steak knife, lets 3 drops of his blood fall into the left scale pan, then takes his place as the next. Victim. Contestant. Defendant. The word comes to me in a deep male voice. My name's Alex. Alex Hayden. I pledge upon the life of that alleged thief. Ronnie Albright, I clarify. Yeah. I call his ghost to the stand with me. I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and all that shit. Ronnie died for allegedly stealing a horse. I steal for real. Money, jewelry, even scrap metal from manhole covers. Alex stands stock still, but the pan containing his blood sinks lower. Wait, my folks and I live paycheck to paycheck. And my mom has cancer. Ovarian. Don't lie to the judge, man, says Brandon. I'm not fucking lying. Let these scales stay tipped if I am. Otherwise, let them balance. After a rather reluctant pause, they recalibrate. There's more. Alex squares his shoulders. I stole a car a month ago for extra dough. Brandon blinks. No shit, no shit. It wasn't even a good car. Just some piece of crap with rusty bodywork. I hot-wired it late one night when no one was around. Took it to the junkyard for some cash. On the way back I thought I saw someone running, but that was probably my imagination. I shudder. Anyway, Mom's chemo costs a fortune. I don't make enough at my McD's job to help make ends meet. If I can get my hands on something valuable, you bet I will. No matter what it is. The scales tip a second time. Alex gags as the noose tightens around his neck. Please. I'll do anything. As long as I get out of here and Mom gets better. Please. The only sound we hear for the next few seconds is Alex's ragged breathing. In, out, in. Ronnie Albright's here too, I quickly tell him. Focus on his innocence and yours. Alex shuts his eyes tight. Poor Ronnie didn't steal anything. I steal for a good cause. The scales return to their former position. Thank you. All of you. Especially Judge Durgee. He disentangles himself from the noose and climbs down from the stool. As he passes me to return to his place, I catch a whiff of his armpits, rank with fear. I'm not smelling great myself. Here. With shaking hands, Alex gives me the scales. I wipe them off again. My turn. With surprising rudeness, Brandon grabs them and yanks the steak knife away from Delia. One finger prick, 3 drops of blood, and he's headed for the stool. You guys are chicken shit. You've never experienced real fear. Let me show you how it's done. He hangs the noose over his head and tightens it like one who's done it hundreds of times. I'm Brandon Lowe. I pledge on the life of that other male killer. Kara? Zeb Comstock. He killed his worst enemy in a drunken brawl. The judge called it murder. Yeah, him. Old Zeb may have done it, but he didn't mean to. The sentence was unfair. After a beat, he continues, first my wish. I want to see what's on the other side. I've seen every horror movie you can think of at least 20 times. Halloween, Friday the 13th, Saw. Saw X is my favorite. The bloodboarding trap. Anyway, these movies show glimpses of what might be beyond the grave, but what's really there? I'm going to find out, and Mr. Comstock, you're going to help me. It wasn't your fault that you offered that other motherfucker. Language, please. Shut up, Delia. What are you, my mom? Brandon coughs. I also cheat at school, and I've stolen things from time to time. That's nowhere near as bad as what I did recently, if it is bad. I don't think so. Remember that party Rachel and Tim threw last week? We all nod and murmur in agreement. I try to keep myself from shivering again. There was this girl, Madison. Super hot. We started dancing, and we were drunk as fuck. The scales tip. Like that's a crime. Who among us hasn't gotten loaded? Everyone here but Alex was at that party. Alex was working. As far as I can remember, we all had more than a few beers. Let me guess, says Delia. You had sex with Madison after she kept saying no. Hey, only when things got too late to stop. You asshole. You fucking pig. Now who's cussing? The left balance pan, sticky with the infinitesimal weight of Brandon's blood, sinks even lower. Okay, strike 2. At least I admit what I did, unlike some people who were also at that party. What did Zeb Comstock do when drunk? Beat someone he hated to death. Right, Kara? Aha. What did I do when I was drunk? I took the hints Madison was dropping that she wanted me. She gave about 1,000 of them. Delia scowls. Yet as soon as she said no, even once, those hints got cancelled. Why didn't you stop me then? Why didn't you pull me aside and tell me I was being a dick? You were too intent on using yours. I can't believe it. Believe it, you hypocrite. You know what? If you burn in hell for what you did, it'll serve you right. Fuck you, Delia. Let's stop arguing and concentrate, I tell them both. To keep the spirit connection open, we quiet down and regroup. Brandon reiterates his desire for the ghost of Judge Durgee. Show me the place where you are. You've come to us. Now let me come to you. Nothing happens for about 10 seconds. Then the scales rebalance and the noose slackens so much it startles Brandon, and he almost falls off the stool. Regaining his composure, he takes the noose off, climbs down and rubs his neck. Bastard. That hurt like a mofo. None of the rest of us sympathize. Why didn't the judge call strike 3 on me and take me to him? That would have granted your wish, dumbass. You don't deserve it, says Alex. Disgusted, Brandon looks my way. All right, Kara. Your turn. Suddenly I don't want to. Hard pass. You can't do that. We all have to go. Not if we're too scared, Delia says. Is it the blood thing? You can use the sewing pin. It's not that. What I did is so bad that, if the judge really is here, I'm out. You can't be serious. I am. They say confession is good for the soul. Okay, but no ratting me out. I'm still trying to deal with this however I can. Don't cry, Kara. Whatever you do, don't shed a single tear. Delia offers me the sewing pin. I prick my finger, which hurts as much as getting a shot, and bleed into the balancing pan once I wipe it off. 4 drops this time. Not 3, 1 more. I allow a 5th drop to join the others. They form a tiny pool. That's too much. I think you ruined it. Try again. Nope. I put pressure on my finger. Hold this, please. Delia does as I take my place on our makeshift gallows. Once I'm properly situated, I hold the scales once more. I pledge my life upon Emily Dawes, an accused murderess. She did no wrong, I have. I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me, Judge. I also swear my mouth is twice as dry as before. The scales rattle in my right hand. I grip them hard. They balance. We've admitted cheating, theft, and drunken assault. I begin once I finally find some spit to swallow. I haven't done any of those things, but something worse. I've killed someone. No way. Alex doesn't believe me. I can tell from the others' horrified expressions that they don't either. We've mentioned the party that almost all of us attended. Alex, you weren't at work when you thought you saw someone. You were hot-wiring that hunk of junk, weren't you? He nods matter-of-factly. The thing is, you did see someone. You saw me running away. From what? My car. I take a deep breath. I hit a girl on a bicycle. Tina Overstreet. She's in our class. No matter how hard I keep a grip on the scales, I feel their tip and not in my favor. It was so dark and I couldn't see, and oh, screw it. I was texting and driving. Complete and utter silence. As soon as I looked up from my phone, I saw Tina swerve into my lane. She was trying to cross the road, and as she hit the hood, that thud, can't get it out of my mind. Breathe, Kara. Breathe. I inhale and exhale 5 times as Delia directs me. Why didn't I pay attention? Why did I feel such a pressing need to respond to some dumb LOL from one of my other friends? I can't go to jail. They'll eat me alive there. I can't. I've thrown off the police so far, but I don't know how much longer I can last. I wait for the others to tell me they forgive me and have my back, but none of them say anything. The blood pan sinks lower. I feel the noose tighten around my neck and gag as Alex did. I do and don't deserve my wish, which I'll tell you in a minute. Right now, I'd like to remind Judge Durgee about Emily Dawes. She gave her wealthy aunt too high a dosage of medicine, and he hanged her for it. Emily's motive, supposedly to gain an early inheritance. Emily didn't mean to kill her aunt. I didn't mean to kill Tina Overstreet, but we're both to blame. The noose cinches tighter. My one wish, to die. Instead of waiting for his honor to tighten the hangman's knot one last time, I kicked the stool out from underneath me. My airways cut off immediately, and spots swim before my eyes. I gray out. Before me lies another gray landscape, humid, with thunderheads rolling overhead and heat lightning flashing from cloud to cloud like an obscure code. I'm dressed in rags. In the back of me is an endless line of people similarly clothed, their faces ashen, their expressions grim. I wonder if we're all in hell, accused of crimes we comprehend all too well. The deep voice I heard before calls my name. Kara Maxim. I find myself before a judge's bench, the specter of Albert Durgee presiding. His red eyes glow like traffic lights buried deep within his mouthless face, and they don't leave my own. You're charged with the death of Tina Overstreet by vehicular homicide. You have the choice of trial by a jury of your peers, or an immediate plea. I see Alex, Brandon, and Delia next to the judge in a jury box. Beside them are the 4 innocents he hanged. They're all in chains, black coiled nooses around each of their necks. Each one stares at me, then closes their eyes and turns their head away. Let my friends go. No matter what else they've done or didn't do, they haven't killed anyone. Please, Your Honor, let these people you hanged plead for their release. As for me, I've shed 5 drops of blood into the balance, 4 for the 4 of us and the 5th for you. The judge's eyes flicker in a blinking gesture. You broke the law when you committed suicide. Therefore, you need redemption. You would do that for my sake. Yes, you and I are alike. We didn't mean to take others' lives, but we did. I kneel before the bench. I'm guilty, Your Honor. Do you wish to speak before I pass a sentence upon you? Yes, I didn't mean to hit Tina. And I'm so sorry. I'd do anything to relive that night and not answer that text, but I know I can't. All I can hope for is the death penalty. A cold wind heavy with rain whirls around me and the others waiting in line. After an eternity, the judge says, "No, I shall not condemn anyone else unjustly. I have been condemned to wait here at this threshold, neither saved nor damned, passing judgment upon those whose guilt has heretofore been concealed. Does it balance against their innocence, the good they've done and the wrong they didn't do? Not for your peers, I'm afraid. They're not just my peers. They're my friends. Then why have they turned away from you? I'd do that to a killer too." "Very well." He pauses. "You shall not die as per your wish. Instead, you'll serve as the next judge. As long as you live, you'll dream of this court and hopefully temper justice with mercy. After your natural death, your spirit will do the same." Relief and horror flood me at the same time. "Yes, Your Honor. As for your friends in the jury box, they shall be freed on the condition that they cease their wrongdoing. If they do not agree, they shall remain here as captive jurors for all time. The 4 I hanged so long ago. Through your act of redemption, you've freed them too." Tears course down the faces of Ronnie Albright, Catherine Bradshaw, Zeb Comstock, and Emily Dawes. Their chains fall off, as do the black nooses around their necks. They then vanish. Alex, Brandon, and Delia gape. They promise to stop cheating, stealing, and drinking. The guys even agree to go to actual jail for what they've done if it comes to that. I know it will in my case. "Farewell," the judge says to all of us. "Remember what you've pledged." I come to on the cold and dusty attic floor of the dirgy house. There's no noose around my neck, but it burns like hell. My friends stand around me holding their flashlights in my face. "My God, Kara," cries Delia. "We thought we'd lost you. Are you okay?" "I'm alive." "Does that count?" The next morning, instead of going to school, I turned myself into the police. Jail's not so bad during the day. At night, though, I can't stop dreaming of the court of the damned where I pride. Alex, Brandon, and Delia don't return as jurors, though. They visit me every month. I've got 5 years to go, 2 in juvie, 3 in adult prison. Have you ever bargained with a ghost? We did. Our lives are no longer in danger, but our souls now hang in the balance.
5 True Scary New Year's Eve Stories to End, 2024. Story number 1. This happened on New Year's Eve back in 2017. I'm from Ohio, just outside of Cleveland, and I was flying home after finishing up a semester at the University of Rochester. I had to stay at school a week after the semester ended for personal reasons, so I unfortunately spent Christmas relatively alone. The flight itself was fine, but I'd already been in a sour mood before I even boarded the plane. I'm a big Browns fan, and as I was at the airport, the Browns lost their final game of the regular season to go 0-16, completely winless. As a lifelong fan, it was a special kind of misery. I think we were the first team to go winless since the 80s or something. To top it off, my flight was delayed, which ruined my family's plans for the night. Originally, we were all supposed to drive to my cousin's house together for a New Year's Eve party and stay the night. But because of the delay, my parents decided to leave early, taking the main car. I was stuck driving the spare car alone. My mom tried to make it up to me by leaving Vera, our golden retriever, behind to keep me company. I wasn't thrilled about making the trip solo, but Vera was always good company. I figured I'd make the most of it. By the time my Uber dropped me off from the airport, it was creeping on 10 o'clock. I didn't even bother unpacking. I just jammed all my stuff in the car, got Vera, locked up the house, and got on the road. The drive itself wasn't anything special, just miles of Ohio, back roads winding through empty fields and patches of forest. There wasn't much snow on the ground, just a light dusting, which was nice since I hated driving in the snow. It was pitch black, though. The only light came from my headlights and the occasional farmhouse with its porch light glowing faintly in the distance. About halfway into the trip, Vera started whining. At first, I thought she just wanted attention, but then she stood up, pacing in the passenger seat. That's when I realized she needed to go to the bathroom. I groaned, knowing there wasn't much else I could do but pull over. The next clearing I came across was small, barely enough space for the car, but it would have to do. I remember noting to myself how dark it really was out there. If not for the patches of white snow here and there, I probably wouldn't have been able to see into the woods at all. I jammed my hands in my pockets and tried my best not to freeze to death. Vera didn't seem to care about the cold or the darkness. Classic golden retriever. I let her out, not even bothering to leash her. She sniffed around the edge of the trees, taking her sweet time. She didn't wander far, just enough to do her business. That's when I heard it. All of a sudden, a loud crashing sound echoed from somewhere in the woods. It wasn't just a branch breaking. It was heavier and deliberate, like someone or something was moving through the trees. I literally jumped from how loud it was. Imagine a grown man sprinting through the forest. That's genuinely what it sounded like. I scanned the darkness, squinting to make out anything, but it was too dark to see beyond the first few trees. Before I could react, Vera bolted directly into the woods. It was some worst nightmare type stuff, I'm telling you. She disappeared into the trees, and I lost sight of her in mere seconds. I yelled her name over and over, but she didn't come back. At that point, my heart was racing, and it started getting hard to breathe. The cold didn't help matters. I couldn't leave her out there. That wasn't an option. Without thinking, I ran into the woods blindly, yelling for her to come back. I didn't want to think about what she was chasing after, so I just ran, letting the adrenaline take over. The only light to aid me was my dim phone flashlight and the thin layer of snow on the ground. It was so dark I was practically running into the trees. I kept running, praying I'd find her before she caught up to whatever was in there. I ran until my lungs gave out from the cold, forcing me to take a break. After nearly falling over from exhaustion, I leaned up against a tree and felt myself about to break down. I honestly didn't know what to do. And then, finally, I saw her. She was crouched low and shivering, walking slowly toward me. Her tail was tucked tightly between her legs. I had never seen her like that before. I dropped to my knees and embraced her. Relief flooded through me. She pressed against me, and I could feel her body trembling. Something had terrified her. That's when I snapped back to reality and realized how serious the situation was. We were still in the middle of the woods, and there was still something out there. I sprung up from my position and told Vera to follow me. This time, she obeyed and stuck by my side like her life depended on it. We started back to the car, but I had no idea if I was going the right way. As if things weren't bad enough, I damn near jumped out of my skin when I heard crashing from behind me. I didn't think. I just started running. Vera darted ahead of me, and I followed her, praying I didn't trip. The crashing sound didn't stop this time. It seemed like it was following us. I can't even tell you how scared I was in that moment. I genuinely felt like I was going to die. By some miracle, Vera led me straight back to the car, and I practically threw her inside before slamming the door shut. As I was jumping into the driver's seat, I glanced back toward the woods, and my stomach dropped. There were 3 figures standing at the edge of the woods, watching us. I jammed the keys in the ignition and floored it out of there. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I was still in shock. It wasn't until I had driven a few miles that I noticed Vera was bleeding. I started panicking as I realized there was a cut just below her shoulder blade. Someone had stabbed her. I slammed on the brakes and ran around to the trunk. My mom always kept a first aid kit in every car. And for once, her insistence on being overly prepared paid off. I cleaned Vera's cut as best I could and wrapped it in gauze. She whimpered, and I worried that I was hurting her, but I knew I was doing the right thing. For the first time since the whole sequence had started, I felt myself begin to relax. It was over. I tried not to think about it for the rest of the drive, but I was just so shell-shocked that something like that had happened to me. I ended up not telling my parents or relatives. I don't know why. It just felt like one of those things you keep to yourself. Story number 2. What I'm about to tell you is something I still think about often, especially during this time of year. This happened on New Year's Eve a few years ago. I was driving to my parents' house to celebrate the New Year with them. They live a few hours away in upstate Pennsylvania, so I'd left in the late afternoon, figuring I'd get there with plenty of time to spare. The drive was supposed to be simple. I'm the type who really enjoys long drives, so a nice, peaceful drive would give me some much-needed time to think. But the weather had other plans. The snow started falling about an hour into my drive. At first, it was light, just flurries dusting the windshield. Nothing to worry about, I thought. The snowfall was actually quite pretty. But I'm pretty sure I jinxed myself. The farther I drove, the harder the snow came down. It just kept falling and falling until I was literally in the middle of an honest-to-God blizzard. The highway turned slick, and visibility dropped to almost nothing. My car, a little sedan, isn't exactly great in snow, so when the tires started slipping on even the smallest hills, I knew I had to pull over. There was no point in risking my life. It was my own fault for not planning out the drive better. I found a spot on the shoulder, far enough off the road to avoid passing cars. Not that there were many. I texted my parents about my situation, and they seemed worried sick. I tried to reassure them that everything would be okay, but I honestly wasn't too sure about that myself. I figured I'd wait out the worst of the storm, hoping it would just ease up. But the snow didn't let up. In fact, it only seemed to get worse from that point. It just kept coming, piling up around the car and on the road ahead. After an hour or so, it became clear I wasn't going anywhere that night. My dad offered to try and get out to me, but I told him that that was a death wish. I told them that if the snow didn't let up, I'd call the police, which he begrudgingly accepted as a decent solution. I really didn't want to call the police, and I didn't have either, so that wasn't an option. I told myself the storm would have to let up eventually, and I decided that if it didn't by the time I got tired, I'd call the police. The thought of spending the night in the car made me uneasy. I didn't want to run out of gas trying to keep warm, and I was worried about killing the battery if I kept the lights or heat on too long. I sat there, turning the engine on and off every so often, trying to conserve what I could. The wind howled outside. I was starting to feel the weight of the isolation when I looked at my rearview mirror and saw headlights cutting through the storm from behind me. I literally wanted to jump for joy. A snowplow pulled up beside me. I was saved. I rolled down the window as the driver leaned out of his. He was an older guy, maybe in his late 50s. He looked nice. He was wearing a thick jacket and had a black knit hat that was pulled down over his ears. I remember thinking his face was really wrinkly, if that makes sense. It looked weathered, like he had spent decades in harsh conditions. I expected him to say something, but he just stared at me for what seemed like an unusual amount of time. Eventually he spoke, asking me if I was okay. He had a really gruff voice, definitely a smoker, and it was honestly kind of off-putting. I told him that I didn't think my car could handle the conditions, trying to be friendly, but also keep my voice steady. He nodded, saying that I wouldn't get far in a storm like this, especially with the car I had. He paused for a few moments, as if he were considering what to say. I watched his eyes scan my back seat, like he was looking for something. I was just about to respond when he offered to give me a ride. I hesitated. I didn't know him. And, yeah, he seemed a little strange. But he struck me as a genuine guy. Plus, staying put with my car all night would have been stupid. I asked him if he could drive me to where I was going, and he said it would be no problem. I then asked him what I should do about my car, to which he shrugged his shoulders and said, "Leave it." After a moment, I agreed. I grabbed my bag and climbed into the cab of the plow. At first, the warmth was comforting. I felt the tension in my shoulders start to ease as I settled into the seat. He asked me where I was headed, and I told him about my parents' house. I gave him directions, and he nodded again, but didn't say much after that. The silence wasn't awkward, but as the minutes passed, I started to feel more and more uncomfortable. That's when I noticed something odd. He wasn't driving in the direction of my parents' house. I knew because the navigation was literally pointing in the opposite direction. I mean, we were on a local highway. There were only 2 ways to go. I tried my best to sound calm and asked him if we were going the right way in the most normal tone I could muster. I don't think I did a good job, though, because I could feel his demeanor slightly change with my question. Without looking at me, he told me we were taking a short detour and that the back roads would be better than the highway. I didn't know the area well enough to argue, but something about the way he said it made my stomach twist. We drove a little longer, and he did, in fact, get off the highway and start driving along some back road. At least the GPS said we were heading in the right direction, so I thought I was just being paranoid. Something in my gut was still telling me he was off, though, so I started looking around the cab more closely. There were red flags everywhere. Empty liquor bottles rolled on the floor near his feet. There were torn-up maps stuffed into the side pockets, and I caught a glimpse of a knife wedged between the seats. I felt my heart start pounding. You know that feeling where your heart just starts beating like crazy, and you're worried other people can hear it? That's what was happening to me. By that time, I was also positive we weren't going the right way. The GPS kept recalibrating because he missed turn after turn, not even looking at it. I was panicking. As we continued driving, I spotted a house in the distance. It was the only one I'd seen for miles. I had to act. It felt like a lifeline. I waited until we got closer, took a deep breath, grabbed the door handle, and then kicked the door open as hard as I could. The cold air hit me like a slap, but I didn't stop. I slammed into the ground and felt my leg flare up with pain. I didn't care, though. I got to my feet and started running toward the house. The man shouted something at me, and I glanced back to see him fumbling for something in the glove box. Probably going for a gun, for all I knew. I didn't look back again. I sprinted through the snow, trying not to slip, until I reached the house. I pounded on the door, screaming for help. A man and woman opened it, and they basically pulled me inside. I collapsed onto the floor, trying to catch my breath. I told them what had just happened, and they didn't ask questions. They just called the police. By the time the cops arrived, the snowplow was gone. They said they'd keep an eye out and search the area, but in that storm, finding him was unlikely. They offered to give me a ride to my parents' house and even help me call someone to tow my car. I was beyond grateful. My dad was furious once he found out, and I haven't driven in the snow since. I always think about what might have happened had I not jumped out of the car when I did.
Now to the next story. Story number 3.
I've never been one for parties. Even in college, I got sick of the whole going out culture pretty quickly. I found that I always had more fun doing something meaningful with a few close friends. I'm from a rural area in northwestern Ontario. This happened a couple of years ago. Ever since I was a kid, my dad and his buddies had a New Year's Eve tradition of going ice fishing. While everyone else was celebrating the new year however they celebrated, my mom wasn't really in the picture, and we didn't have much extended family. So I grew up spending New Year's Eve on a frozen lake in the frigid cold with my dad, his brother, my brother, and my dad's friends. My dad isn't around anymore, and my brother moved to Chicago a number of years ago, but I still try to go ice fishing as much as possible, especially as a way to celebrate New Year's Eve. I'm not really sure why. I just feel like I have some kind of obligation to keep the tradition going. My two best friends, Nate and Trevor, are pretty rugged guys themselves. You know the type. Those burly, lumberjack-looking dudes who seem more in touch with the wilderness than society. That's honestly how I'd describe myself too. Anyway, the three of us tried to keep the tradition alive as best we could, which was great because spending New Year's Eve alone would be depressing as hell. Nate was the one driving that day. His truck was perfect for the job. Big tires, 4-wheel drive, and enough room in the back for all of our gear. We packed everything we needed: rods, tip-ups, bait, a sled to haul everything, and a small pop-up shelter to shield us from the worst of the cold. The forecast predicted a clear night. But in Ontario, you never trust the weather reports entirely. We were prepared for anything, or at least we thought we were. The lake we were heading to wasn't a well-known spot, and that's what we loved about it. It was tucked away, surrounded by thick trees, with a surface that stayed frozen solid even in the milder parts of winter. It wasn't a place you'd stumble across unless you knew exactly where to look. As Nate navigated the snowy back roads, the excitement started to build. There's something about the quiet stillness of ice fishing, just you, your friends, and the promise of the catch. It definitely beats drinking beer after beer at some random bar. As we pulled up to park near the trailhead, I noticed someone standing nearby. He was a few yards away, bundled up in heavy winter gear, but something about him didn't feel right. He wasn't moving, just standing there, staring at our truck. At first, I thought maybe he was just a fellow angler sizing us up, but then I saw him glance down at his phone, then back at us, then back at his phone again. For some reason, it didn't feel casual. I don't really know how to explain it. It just felt off. I muttered to my friends that the guy was creeping me out. The two of them looked up. Trevor shrugged his shoulders, and Nate nodded, but didn't say anything. We were about to start unloading when the man suddenly rushed toward us, waving his arms wildly. I rolled the window down to hear what he was saying. He started screaming that we needed to come help him immediately, and that his buddy had just fallen through the ice. He pointed at his phone, saying the other guy they were with had just told him. He sounded frantic, and his desperation was definitely real. Without even thinking, Trevor opened his door, and then we were all out, following the man as he took off down the trail toward the lake. We didn't stop to grab anything, not even our coats. The urgency in his voice was enough to override any second thoughts. The man was practically sprinting, and we had to jog to keep up. As we got closer to the lake, I started to notice something that didn't sit right. He wasn't leading us to the usual fishing spots. Instead, we were heading toward a more remote part of the shoreline, away from where the ice was thickest. I was about to stop following, but it was too late. They appeared in view before we could do anything. 2 more men standing near the edge of the lake. They weren't dressed for fishing and they weren't moving. They were just standing there waiting. I glanced down at their hands. They were both armed. My blood ran cold. One of them yelled at us to stop right there as we approached. He raised his gun and pointed it directly at me. I honestly can't describe the feeling you get when someone points a gun at you. I hope no one ever has to experience what I felt that day. My heart dropped as the man we'd been following turned to face us, a smirk creeping across his face. We'd been set up. The second guy demanded Nate's keys along with everything we had on our person. We didn't really have a choice. These guys didn't seem like they were messing around. Nate reached into his pocket and tossed the truck keys to the man, and the 3 of us emptied our pockets. I tried to hang on to my phone, but one of the men said, "Phones too." Nate said his was in the car, which they laughed about. I've never been more furious in my life. How could we have been so foolish? I clenched my fists, wishing those guys weren't armed. I would have taken all of them on. Within moments, they grabbed everything and walked us back up the path at gunpoint. Then, one of the men sped off in Nate's car, while the other two backed away into the woods, presumably to their own vehicle. I debated following them, but I figured that wouldn't be much help. We stood there for a moment, shivering, before Nate pulled out his phone. I knew he had lied about it being in the car. I honestly don't know what we would have done had he not thought quickly on his feet. Somehow, we still had service. He called the police, explaining everything as clearly as he could. The dispatcher told us to stay put, and we huddled together for warmth as we waited for help to arrive. I was still so unbelievably angry. Nate was the worst, though. He kept kicking nearby trees and cursing at the top of his lungs. There was nothing Trevor or I could do to calm him down. The whole thing had happened so fast. I was honestly still processing it all. Why the hell would there be people out in the middle of nowhere on New Year's Eve of all days? It didn't make any sense. I'll skip all the boring details. The cops took an official report and were gracious enough to drive us all back to Trevor's house, which was the closest. As you might expect, Nate's car was never located, and those people were never caught. The three of us still can't believe what happened. Trevor thinks we just stumbled into the wrong people at the wrong time, that they weren't planning on robbing us, but we just so happened to be the perfect targets. I think that's possible, but it still feels so unlikely. Who just springs a trap on some random people in the spur of the moment? But it also wouldn't make sense for them to be waiting for us at such a secluded spot. They had no guarantee anyone would show up. I really have no idea what to make of this whole incident.
Now to the next story. Story number 4.
After moving to the dorms for college, I started drinking a lot more than I did in high school. It changed me. During winter break, I came back home to my parents' house to spend the holidays with my family. New Year's was just becoming a holiday that I looked forward to since it entailed a lot of partying with other people my age. It was New Year's Eve night. My parents were out at a friend's party. I had my 2 best friends over. I'll call them Jim and Steve. That was really our hometown squad back then. We didn't have that many other friends that liked to go out. I had them over to drink and hang out while we figured out our plans for the night. Jim, apparently, was talking to this girl who invited him to a party across town. She told him that we could come too, so that was our plan. We downed a few shots of rum, then polished off a few cans of beer each. We were all pretty drunk. Jim called an Uber to the address the girl gave him, and we all split it 3 ways. Jim said he never met this girl, but they matched on Tinder a week ago, and she was really pretty and seemed cool based on her texting style. The Uber driver pulled us up in front of some storage-looking building. This was apparently the address. We were confused. Jim read the address over, and we all confirmed on our phones that this building was what came up under the address. Before allowing the Uber driver to leave, Jim confirmed with the girl he was talking to that it was, in fact, this building, and not a house. Almost instantly, she texted back confirming this, so we all got out of the Uber. The car slowly disappeared down the street. We made jokes about not really wanting to go in and calling the Uber to come back, but ultimately we ended up just going in. We looked for an entryway, and it seemed there was a small door left open with a big guy standing by it. We approached him and asked if this was the party. He nodded his head and pointed into the doorway without saying a word. Pretty sketchy. We walked into this very dark, narrow hallway, following a lone ceiling light hanging at the end of the hall. We were getting closer to the sound of loud, rumbling music. At the end of the hall, we found the opening to what I guess was supposed to be the party floor. It wasn't nearly as big on the inside as the outside. It was very dark. the only lighting coming from a couple of cheap-looking strobe light machines. There wasn't a huge crowd, maybe 20 to 30 people sprawled out throughout the area. No one was really dancing. Everyone was kind of standing in their own little circles. A lot of people were just sitting in chairs by themselves, kind of eyeing us down. The weirdest and most off-putting thing of all, though, we didn't see any females. The music was very loud and hard to talk over, so we moved to a corner further from the speakers and the crowds. I yelled at Jim to call that girl and ask her where she was. She texted back, saying she was in the back section just beyond the double doors. She told us to meet her there. This didn't sound right, and I told Jim that. He said we'd just take a peek back there and leave if she wasn't there. Jim led the way, following the directions from this girl. We went through these 2 doors held open by door stoppers into a dimly lit, narrow hall with a bunch of doors. As we walked, someone quickly appeared from one of the rooms and whispered something in Jim's ear. Jim kept saying, "What?" looking very confused. Then he turned to us and waved his hand, saying, "Let's just get out of here." We didn't question it. As we walked back through that little main dance hall, I could tell we were getting looked at again. Some big guy at one of the doors tried stopping us for whatever reason. We just walked through him and back down the hall we came through. We noticed he was following us, and finally Jim yelled, "Run!" and started sprinting down the hall. That's when I knew stuff was real. We followed, and the guy behind us yelled at the top of his lungs, "Yo, stop them!" Probably to the guy standing at the entry door. He didn't really make an effort to stop us, though, when we ran back out the front door. We ran out of the little parking lot into the closest main road, where we called an Uber again. Jim explained that the dude in the hall whispered in his ear to get out of there before midnight, as they were going to trap everyone in there. Jim didn't ask any more questions. He basically just told us to haul ass out. This led us to believe that girl Jim was talking to didn't exist. It was just some kind of trap to lure unsuspecting victims into whatever was about to go down in that building that night. We made an anonymous police report that something was going down in there that night and that it should be investigated and shut down. We spent midnight on that New Year sitting in my living room by ourselves. We never found out what transpired in that warehouse. Now to the last story, story number 5. It was New Year's Eve of 2016. My girlfriend and I were hosting a party in my condo. I invited about 30 people and said they could bring whoever they wanted as long as they were respectful of my place. As we were setting things up for the party, we kept losing things, and then finding them back in the same place a few minutes later. Like the TV remote, her bag, or just anything we seemed to need at the moment. We thought we were just imagining it, but it kept happening over and over. We figured it was the 2 of us just accidentally moving stuff without the other knowing. Our guests started pouring in around 9 to 10, which was when we told everyone to arrive. Since my friends would be bringing friends, I positioned some of my surveillance cameras in rooms with valuables, such as the living room and the bedrooms. By the time everyone was over, things were still kind of disappearing. At one point, I wanted to show my friends my new pair of shoes that my girlfriend got me for Christmas, and I couldn't find them. Even stranger, my window was left open in my bedroom. Albeit it was a party, and I had to assume my girlfriend or some of the guests had to do with some of this stuff, it started getting weird. Nevertheless, the condo was crowded, and I didn't have much time to be worrying about this stuff. I told myself I'd check the surveillance footage after the party, or, if things persisted, I'd check it during the party. There were a handful of faces I didn't recognize, but I met most of them through whichever friends brought them over. That time of the night that people either can't wait for or dread finally came, and we all started to gather around the TV to watch the ball drop in Times Square. I looked around the room and noticed some tall guy in a black trench coat facing the wall opposite the TV. He was looking down at the couch doing something. I was about to ask my friend Alan if he knew who that was, but everyone started counting down. So I turned my attention to that and joined in. Everyone yelled, "Happy New Year," and all that. Anyone who came as a couple got their New Year's kiss. When everyone settled down a bit, I realized that tall guy wasn't in the room anymore. I asked Alan if he knew who that tall guy was, and he said, "Yeah, that's Tom's friend." So that was that. One of my friend's girlfriends eventually came downstairs and said whoever the guy in the trench coat wasn't leaving the bathroom. I told her it was Tom's friend and to just use the master bedroom bathroom, so she went back upstairs. Eventually, the clock hit 2 a.m., and that's when things were dwindling down and people were starting to make their exits. When everyone was gone, my girlfriend and I said we'd clean up tomorrow. However, we did a quick inspection to make sure nothing was stolen. Her bag was gone completely this time, and so was one of my expensive watches. I rushed to our bedroom to pause the video cameras so I could download the footage and play it back. We started watching from the time guests started to arrive. I had it on fast forward, and we just skimmed all 3 cameras. Eventually, we noticed Tom's friend in the trench coat in the guest bedroom going through our stuff. I paused the footage in a fit of rage. I cut the footage to a 30-second clip, sent it to my phone, and then texted Tom immediately. I said, "Your friend stole stuff from my apartment, bro." He texted back, "Dude, no way." "What do you mean?" Then I sent him the footage. A minute later, he texted back, "Who the hell is that?" "I don't know who that is." I wrote back, "I was told that was your friend." Once again, he said, "Dude, I don't know that guy." My girlfriend and I got nervous now, so I went on a texting spree, texting all of my friends who came and asking if they knew that person. From everyone who was still awake, we got a bunch of no's. We went to finish the video footage, following the guy in the trench coat. He made his way into our bedroom, opened the door, then started dropping some of our belongings out the window, including my girlfriend's bag. I felt like the room was spinning, and my heart was in my throat. Then the man in the video quickly turned around, as if he heard someone coming up the stairs, and he crawled under the bed. We sped through the rest of the video footage, but he never got out from under the bed that we were currently sitting on, using the laptop. I saw the fear in my girlfriend's eyes and her temptation to scream, but I covered her mouth with my hand and whispered in her ear, "Run on the count of 3. But she couldn't help it. She let out a cry, so I had to yell at her to just run out of the room. I pushed her off the bed and followed close behind. I took a look under the bed before slamming the door shut, and I saw him down there, under the bed. We made eye contact. It was an indescribable moment. We called the cops in the kitchen, both grabbing big kitchen knives. The police made it to my condo in like 3 minutes, but by that time, the intruder was gone, and our bedroom window was once again open. He had escaped through the window and gotten away with our belongings. I handed over the video footage files to the police department, and they said they would review it and record an image of the man's face. Of course, he was never found, at least not by our local police department. Art is indeed one of the best ways to connect and explore the unknown, mysterious history of the world. That could be why spooky adventure lovers adore visiting dark museums where they can face eerie events and feel the chill that comes with it. Lucky for these kinds of adventure lovers, there are a lot of haunted museums in America that are open for visitors. Those museums are especially frightening at night, when the silence makes every whisper even more salient. If you're brave enough to step inside any of these 5 haunted museums in the U.S., you might find yourself face to face with a mystery that will haunt you long after your visit. Number 1. Zach Bagans' Haunted Museum. Zach Bagans' name is famous for most fans of the supernatural. He's a famous paranormal investigator who opened his own haunted museum in Las Vegas in the historic Wengert Mansion. This location, filled with decades of haunted past, is probably the main reason for the eerie reputation this museum has gained. The museum is known for its creepy appearance, secret passages, and some cursed artifacts that belong to the most dangerous serial killers. Even though its creepy atmosphere frightens so many, the museum still has a lot of visitors. Recently, it has become a trend among tourists in Nevada to visit chilling places like this after trying their luck in gambling establishments. But those who visit Zach Bagans' haunted museum first and decide to gamble then usually prefer safe online platforms like Pinup Casino Canada, where they can test their luck from the comfort of home without chilling encounters. Interestingly, a famous singer, Post Malone, claims that after visiting this museum, he got into a serious car accident and blames one of the museum's artifacts, a Dubbock box. The legend says this box contains a ghost inside, which causes terrible things to anyone holding it. Number 2. The National Museum of the Paranormal. The National Museum of the Paranormal, also called the Archive of the Afterlife, attracts horror lovers with its fascinating collection of historical items that cause creepy paranormal activities. Some of those items are known to be from the battlefields of World War II and the former penitentiary of the West Virginia state. In those artifacts, you can find tools for funerary and mortuary purposes, which were used on humans, noting that at the time, the knowledge of the human body and its decomposing was very little. Paranormal investigations are going on about all the above mentioned. One more interesting thing is that the experts are trying to learn more about the portrait of a woman named Anne, which is supposed to be haunted. Number 3. Museum of Death. Even the name Museum of Death is enough to assume how much this place frightens visitors who just come there to explore the history of art. The Museum of Death was opened in 1995, and at the time, it was owned by Wyatt Earp. It is built around the concept of the permanency of death and the fragility of all human beings. Here you can find a lot of objects that are dedicated to a person's complicated life, which sometimes ends up being full of criminal activities. This museum has the world's biggest collection of terrifying items, which includes the artworks of serial killers, crime scene photographs, murder and forensic instruments, and so much more. Number 4. The Mutter Museum. If you would like to be educated about America's horrifying medical wonders, the Mutter Museum is a must-visit place, and for good reason. This museum contains preserved anatomical samples and medical instruments from America's darkest plague events. On the official website of the museum, you can read that the museum was made to exhibit the mysteries of the human body and to show the history of developing disease treatments. Inside the museum, you can see a lot of preserved body parts, like hands, or more than 1,300 wet specimens from human parts that are not supposed to be there. Number 5. Lizzie Borden Bed and Breakfast Museum. Lizzie Borden Bed and Breakfast Museum, even though it's not exactly a museum, but an open crime scene, attracts many visitors who love to explore mysteries. The legend of this place says that in 1892, a 32-year-old woman named Lizzie murdered her father and stepmother. Later, she was acquitted, and she supposedly lived a quiet life. But the legend and its secrets continue to exist. Once Lizzie herself said that she didn't touch the axe that was used for the murder, and there's something else in the house. To find out, you can book this room to spend the night and experience all the paranormal occurrences that are happening inside.
Now to the next story. Story number 2.
Everyone has heard stories about the adventures of different ships that vanished mysteriously. The same goes for unexplainable and spooky tales of sailors and crews of those ships. Throughout history, Numerous accounts of haunted ships and their eerie fates have fascinated people worldwide. Those stories inspired countless movies, plays, and books, but we still don't know whether they are actually true or just stories. Some enthusiasts are so inspired by these tales that they even aim to find and visit the places where the ships might have sunk, while regular horror admirers just tend to read these stories for fun and inspiration. If you're brave enough, you might like the idea of exploring these mysteries yourself. If that's the case, here are 5 of the most mysterious ghost ships and their chilly tales waiting to be discovered. Number 1. Chestatee Ghost Boat. Lake Lanier, connected to the Chestatee River in Georgia, has been the source of creepy stories for decades now. The Chestatee Ghost Boat is no exception. This mysterious vessel sank under unexplained circumstances about 20 years ago. As a result, people believed that the ship was haunted. However, after 20 years, the boat was finally taken out of the lake by marine specialists. After 2021, a whole new series of rumors about eerie occurrences on this boat started. The reports say that the boat was full of dirty, broken chairs, and everything else on the top of the vessel looked as if someone was in the process of wrecking the boat, even underwater. Even though the specialists mentioned there were no signs of ghosts, there's no doubt that something strange and paranormal had been going on this boat, and it still might be happening. What makes this tale even more chilling is that the area around Lake Lanier attracts many visitors, especially gamblers who like to have fun in nearby casinos. Since the incident, many of them prefer to keep a distance from brick-and-mortar casinos and instead try their luck online with free slots, no download from the comfort of home. After all, the legends of haunted places like the Chestatee Ghost Boat prove that not all gambles come with the chance to win, but some of them give us even more, to encounter the unknown. Number 2. The Flying Dutchman. The Flying Dutchman is definitely the most famous ghost ship that has ever existed. The story of this ship has inspired so many artistic masterpieces, including the well-known movie The Pirates of the Caribbean, The Dead Man's Chest. The legend says that the captain of the ship, Van der Decken, tried to pass his ship through the Cape of Good Hope during terrible weather while he was on his way to the East Indies. Unfortunately, he failed very badly, and since that day the whole crew has been cursed to sail across the oceans for all eternity. Today so many sailors claim they saw the Flying Dutchman in the sea, witnessing the ship continuing its never-ending trip. Number 3. SV Kaz. 2 SV Kaz 2 was found drifting near the Great Barrier Reef in Australia in 2007 after only 5 days had passed since its journey had started. The reports about this ship's story say that there were 3 crew members on the ship, and they were not very well experienced. The interesting part is that something strange and unexplainable happened to those crew members. The ship mysteriously disappeared without any trace under a weird situation. Some believe that it happened because of stormy weather, or could be the fault of pirates. The mysterious part was when the ship was found, it seemed untouched and in perfect condition, if we don't include the one sail, which was completely shredded. However, the crew was never found. The investigators believe they could have been drowned while untangling a fishing lure that was caught in a rudder. It had also been said that some unknown monster captured them. Number 4. The Lady Lovibond. This haunted ship was a very interesting story, which is about the ship's captain's wedding in 1748 and includes topics like love, jealousy, and rage. The Lady Lovibond was set to sail right before Valentine's Day to celebrate. Everything was going well, but the groom's friend, who was in love with the bride, decided to drive the ship in the wrong direction into the Goodwin Sands, sinking it and murdering everyone on the ship out of vengeance. After those events, it is known that the ship can be seen every 50 years. There are claims that it was seen in the years 1798, 1848, 1898, and 1948. There is no confirmation if it was seen in 1998 as well, but the fact is this ship still remains a mystery. Number 5. The Mary Celeste. The story of Mary Celeste is another interesting, unexplainable story of haunted ships. It was found by another ship named Dei Gratia in 1872 close to the Strait of Gibraltar, and it should have arrived in Genoa, Italy. When the ship was searched, the crew was gone, but there was no sign of violence or any explanation for why they could be gone because everything else was untouched and still in the same place, except the lifeboat and the captain's logbook. After examining the situation, there were thoughts that this might be because of food poisoning that drove the whole crew mad or some technical problem on the ship. Either way, it's clear that this made the crew jump off of it. Today, there are still beliefs and theories that it was because the ship was haunted by ghosts, sea monsters, or even aliens. Therefore, it remains a secret.
Now to the next story. Story number 3.
Many people associate their bad memories and experiences with school. Yes, school is supposed to be a sanctuary for all kids, but unfortunately, it's hard to feel safe when you know your school is being haunted by eerie creatures. Well, for some schools in America, the atmosphere is far darker, filled with paranormal activities, mysterious noises, and even ghostly figures. There are a lot of legends about these schools in America, and no one knows whether they are true or just that, legends. Either way, if you're brave enough to explore the spookier side of education, here are 5 haunted schools in America that are sure to give you chills. Number 1, Lincoln High School, which is located in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, is known to be home to paranormal events. Luckily, there are no reports of death, but the students and the school staff claim that they have experienced some unusual things. In particular, they've been complaining about hearing banging and knocking sounds from the basement and a boiler room while everything was supposed to be shut down. Interestingly, these creepy experiences always take place late at night during extracurricular activities or events. While some people think it's just their imagination playing tricks, others find it hard to ignore the chills these stories bring. Therefore, it's easy to understand why students might prefer to distract themselves while enjoying viral games between classes or after school, instead of thinking about these mysterious happenings in the basement. Further unusual activities include hearing footsteps while nobody was around, doors opening and closing by themselves, a person walking near windows inside the school in a flash of light, and the scariest occurrence, a man floating in the air off the stage floor and fading away. Number 2. Pocatello High School in Idaho is one of the best documented schools, which shows that the place is haunted. The cameras at school have spotted many odd activities during holidays, and because of this, the school got national attention. The footage shows an apparition that's walking out of the school bathroom along with electrical disturbances. People also believe that a female ghost lives in the school's theater, another spirit inhabits inside the gym, and a woman who's sitting at the library window appears when the library is empty. There was also a complaint from the school principal, who was disturbed by the sound of banging beneath the floor 3 to 4 times. Believe it or not, he got so scared he yelled for the sound to stop because he was too busy to get distracted. Number 3. Matthew Wally Elementary School is known to be one of the most haunted elementary schools in America. Because of the paranormal incidents, the school relocated 3 times. The school was named after a boy who died at the age of 9 by unknown causes, so this was a gesture of honoring him. Reportedly, his ghost had been haunting the school since his disappearance. In fact, people have noticed Matthew's ghost in restrooms, playgrounds, and on Halloween nights. Aside from the ghost of Matthew Wally, there are 2 other ghosts who have appeared inside the school, and they are both boys. They are believed to be the victims of brutal treatment at the school. The students have also witnessed other unusual occurrences like the sound of footsteps in empty halls and classrooms. Number 4. Old Milton Elementary School in Illinois was constructed in 1904 and remained as a school until 1984. It was abandoned because of the fear that the building was haunted. Some believe that the ghost stories about this school are not true, but there were many claims of strange things happening. There's a horrific story that happened in this school. According to it, the school janitor raped and murdered a student named Mary, and later he hung himself out of shame. The students and the staff have mentioned they've seen Mary's ghost wandering around the school grounds, as well as hearing unexplainable sounds and seeing creepy shadows. Number 5. Urbana High School. Luckily for horror enthusiasts in Illinois, Old Milton Elementary School isn't the only school in the state that's haunted. In fact, Urbana High School is another school that has become quite popular for its ghost stories. It is rumored that the school is haunted, especially the tower. There used to be classes held in that tower, but because of eerie occurrences, it was shut down. Those occurrences included loud, strange tapping noises. People say that as of today, sometimes the lights appear at night that are coming from the tower. The most famous ghost that haunts Urbana High School is the ghost of a female teacher who fell in love with a student, but she couldn't handle it and hanged herself. Other ghosts that are known to live in those walls are the ghosts of a woman who was involved in an affair with a married teacher and a boy who committed suicide.
If you're near Rochester Heights, I need your help. The thing in the hallway won't let me leave my room. Through my peephole, I saw that it was still there. The flayed skin glistened under the dim glow of the hanging incandescent light bulb. It knew I was watching and came close until the peephole framed only its visage. The conjoined faces of my neighbors stared into me, with mouths that might have been kissing once. It grinned or tried to. Their tongues had fused to become fat and forked, and it now used to lick at the glass of my peephole. It pulls back without warning, and once more I get a good look at it. 2 human forms smashed together. The smaller one clinging to the larger one's torso, resembling a gibbon and her young but distorted into something fleshy and vile. I can see the sinew of its exposed muscles, the blood vessels, and the flaps of flesh that hang off it. I can see the hanging skin testicles on the larger body, and can see that the clinging body grinds itself into him where their groins meet. But whether it's in agony or ecstasy, I can't tell. It runs off into the dark corners of the hallway, but I'm not fooled. I know it's trying to lure me out, and I don't want to find out why. I need your help, please. I'm trapped on the 4th floor of Rochester Heights, in room 405, a dilapidated high-rise apartment in East Oakland. Within the last 6 hours, at what must have been dead midnight, something horrible happened. Whether it was an invading force or a corrupting evil, I don't know. But I can't leave, and my room is the only safety I have. And even then, I don't know how long until it gets in. I'll have to go back, recount all that's happened leading up to this. And maybe, just maybe, someone can help me. It all started with that damn fetish. Not the sexual perversion type. No, it was an idol. It was 4 a.m., and I was about to throw in a load of laundry before I was off to bed, and there it was. Splayed out smack dab in the middle of our laundromat, still slick with blood. I didn't know what I was looking at. Some spindly thing strung up to a wooden crescent frame. But with each passing second, more of its form registered in my mind, and I nearly doubled over and lost my breakfast at the realization that it was a skinned, headless dog crucified. The cops were called, and it was found out that the new cameras were touted by management and used as a justification for yet another outrageous rent hike, was nothing more than a deterrent, as in they're useless and not even hooked up to a power source. They've let my bathtub sink halfway into the room underneath me, so while it was infuriating, I wasn't surprised. Later it came to be known that the dog was Mrs. Lawrence's beloved poodle, Butterball. The poor widow was hysterical and demanding a full-scale investigation. She might have gotten her way had nightfall not greeted us with yet another fucked-up finding. Harold, a shut-in who lived on the top floor, was found dead. I'm a night owl through and through, so I was awake when the discovery was made. There was no commotion but hushed whispers and tensed bodies. I tend to creep around the stairwell between the 4th and 3rd floor since it's scarcely populated and has a small accessible window that I can smoke out of. I was trying to fish for a signal this time since my Wi-Fi was acting up and my cell signal was dead altogether. That's when I heard them walking down the stairs talking. Alina and Macy from the 4th floor. I could tell from their tone of voice something was wrong. That and the time. 2 a.m. No one but me was up this late here most days. I strained my ears to listen in. Folded like a fucking pretzel, and there was a mess everywhere. Tony says he thinks he's been there since they found the hag's dog in the laundromat. He tried calling the cops, but it's not going through. Elena was whispering to Macy, "Well, who was it?" Macy asked. "That creep Harold from the 2nd floor. The one that Carter beat up for stalking his girlfriend. What was her name, John?" "It's Joanna." "Don't be mean, this is serious. What did Tony do about the body?" "Sorry, I just think she's frumpy and plain. Way out of Carter's league." "And nothing yet." He told the manager, and he tried calling the police too, but no luck. He wants the body out of here as soon as possible, so he sent Tony out to the station in person. But it's been 2 hours since, and he hasn't even texted me once. I'm starting to get worried. Want to go look for him? No, that would be dramatic of me. We're not even dating, just messing around. Still, you know the Donut Royal is open 24/7. We can get a few and meet Tony halfway there. Elena said, and the two started walking down the stairs. I froze, and the thought to try to sneak away came to me too late. The two women didn't even acknowledge me as they walked past me. I knew 3 things then. That Eliana is fucking our maintenance man. That I'm either invisible or detestable enough to be invisible. And that Harold was dead. I wouldn't know it then, but I would learn later that night that this was just the beginning of a nightmare. I finished my cigarette and sulked back upstairs, still unaware that anything was wrong. I should have paid attention more to my surroundings during my trek, because I'm certain by then it had started. I only picked up on the fact that every light was dimmer, not by much but enough for it to be noticeable. I went back to my room, bolted the door, and tried getting my laptop to connect to the internet again. The only 2 pages it loaded up were ones I already had open before the Wi-Fi shat out. Reddit, and a random porn site that only played a very low-quality section of a video I was trying to get off to. It wasn't cutting it, so I decided to use my imagination, but after 15 minutes and a cramped hand, I decided to try to settle in for an early night. I gave it up after 45 restless minutes and pressed my ear to the wall next door. The couple there, Joanna and Carter, were young and hot-blooded, fucking all hours of the night, and I had gotten off to the sounds a few times. Sometimes they went at it around the building in communal spaces they thought were empty late hours of the night. I had caught them a few times, but it was never reciprocated. They'd finish and sheepishly walk away, and none were wiser of my presence. Now they were quiet except for the natural shifts in breathing that came with sleep. I wondered if they knew Harold was dead, and I wondered how'd they react when they found out. I wasn't there for the supposed blowout between him and Carter, but I had heard about it. Macy and Eliana loved to gossip above my smoking spot. I think Harold caught them like I had, and the poor fellow, trapped within the cage of his delusions, confronted Carter. Everyone knew he had a thing for Joanna, and she was too polite or sympathetic to ever be stern with him. So he must have interpreted it as reciprocation, and it ended with him getting stomped out and the residents being quietly grateful for it. Poor Harold, in his mid-40s and living with his geriatric mother because he was too messed up in the head to go anywhere else. Mary was her name, I think, and then I felt a horrible tinge of guilt. Did she know of her son's death, and where was she? I hoped she had her mind completely slipped away tonight so that she couldn't comprehend what had happened to Harold. I used to fear ending up like him the most, but that was before tonight. Sleepless and frustrated, I felt the ache for another cigarette, and I went for a smoke. I pondered why no one else was freaking out about his death, or why it was being kept secret. I didn't consider it until then, but if he was dead and he truly died in such an agonized way, who had done it? And were they still around? Cold sweat trickled down my face at the question, and I felt compelled to turn around and head back to my room. After 2 more steps, I decided to do just that, but something else was off. The hallway was darker now, much more than before, and the air was cold in a way that's hard to describe. Its bitter chilling piercing straight into nerve and bone. Vertigo threatened to overcome me with each passing moment as the persuasive wrongness intensified. I couldn't define it at first, but as I kept walking it became clear. The hallway was longer than it should have been. I froze, unable to make sense of that fact, and I scrutinized my surroundings a bit more. The The ceiling was higher too by a few feet. My mouth was dry now and I tried to swallow, but nothing could bring me back to lucidity. Foot over foot, I forced myself to walk back towards my room, and I was halfway there when once more my heart stilled in abject fear. At the end of the hallway, from the 5th floor, someone was descending the stairs. Rational thought should have driven me to head toward them and ask or warn them about what was happening, but some deep instinct knew it was wrong in all the ways a living thing could be. Even the stairs leading up to the upper floors felt wrong, as if they weren't of this world. I'd have to get closer to this approaching thing if I wanted to get to my room, so I turned back around and tried to dash as silently but quickly as possible down the hall, but feared I would be spotted before I could fling myself down them. A storage closet to my right that was never locked served as my refuge, and I tried to slink into it as quietly as possible. The closet used a repurposed apartment door, so it had a peephole for me to gaze out of. Minutes passed by at an agonizing pace, but it did eventually come into view. From the periphery it emerged, robed in ornate cloth and moving as if it were dancing on air. Upon looking down, I saw that it was skating across the air, legless and floating. From its hood, a strange blinking light cast out onto the dark hallway. As it was at eye level with me and directly in front of me, I caught a side profile of its face and I held my breath to stifle a gasp. Its face was like TV static, flickering in black and white chaos. I closed my eyes then, fearing that it would turn to face me and I'd get an unadulterated look at it. In the still moments, as I waited for it to fling the door open, I thought back to all the other strange shit I had heard about leading up to now. Tony had found nearly a dozen dead animals around the apartment perimeter in the last few days. He didn't want to talk about the state he found them in, and I wondered if they were anything like Butterball, skinned and crucified. I waited until my body ached and I mustered the courage to peer into the hole once more. An empty hallway greeted me, and I slowly opened the door and crept my way out. This floor was only occupied by me, Massey, Alana, Carter, and Joanna. I went to their door and caught myself when I went to knock. I hesitated for a moment before I tried the knob. I winced as it creaked open and I made my way in, trying to close the door as quietly as possible. I called out for them in a hushed voice, but as I looked around their empty living room, I felt silly. Before I left, I decided to check their room. Someone needed to know about the wrongness of what was happening, and I still don't know what the fuck is happening. I didn't recognize them at first. I thought it was a pile of blankets, but as the heavy movement and labored breath caused something to click in my head, I couldn't stifle the yell. It caused the head, or more aptly, heads to snap up to face me, and I had no delusions of what it was. Carter and Joanna permanently joined at their groins, chest, and mouth. They had been fucking missionary when it happened, so Carter had his body draped over Joanna's and her arms and legs clasped around his torso, waist, and ass. I thought they had been flayed at first, but the more I looked, the more it seemed like the flesh had sloughed off them. They had hoisted itself up on all fours, if you can call it that, and let out a breathy moan in both male and female voices. The conjoined mouth grinned at me, and as it took a step towards me, I finally snapped out of it. We both ran at the same time, but it was slowed by its deformed mass, but the distance between us was still too close for any comfort as I ran out into the hallway and towards my room. I thanked God that I hadn't locked my door as I threw it open and turned to slam it shut. I screamed the moment I was face to face with the abomination, and without a moment to spare, I bolted and locked it. It tried the knob a few times before it resorted to gentle taps and then deafening pounding and then silence. Now it's just waiting there for me, but what I fear most is that whatever I did to them will come around, lured by its presence, and do the same to me. It's been hours since, but the sun has not risen. I tried sleeping in the bathtub. I couldn't stand the proximity of my bed to Joanne's and Carter's. But when I stepped in, I remembered that half the tub couldn't support my weight as water damage had left it half sunk into the floor. So I went back to the living room and saw my laptop still sitting there with this webpage open. Please, if anyone can help me or has any ideas, now's the fucking time. I don't know how much longer I have left. Just now I decided to peer out my window and was greeted by Stygian darkness, but what really scares me is the few breaks in it. Occasionally lighting flashes across the sky and illuminates the world below, a lifeless sand sea. Lighting cut through in brilliant flashes, stained by black and white patterning like TV static. Part 2. A lot has happened since my last post, but I'd like to thank you all for your suggestions. especially the bathtub suggestion. Salt is ineffective against whatever is happening here, and I've learned my lesson about trying to avoid static noise. I haven't slept since, and Joanna and Carter are still prowling the hallway, fucking with me. I can only guess that whatever warped their bodies also twisted their minds. I thought I was screwed, but then I was reminded of the bathtub. I went to it with my pack filled with a few bottles of water and my laptop. The landlord and management have known about it for 6 months now. Water had seeped into the walls and started to rot away the floor, so much so that the bathtub's far end was noticeably sunken. When I showered, I hugged the drain end, fearful that my weight would cause it to fall through the floor. Now I went to that end and stepped in. It sagged and groaned with my weight, but held, so I started jumping on it, landing with as much force as I could muster, until on the third try the floor gave way and I went with it. I landed badly, cracking my side across the outer rim of the tub, and had the wind knocked out of me, but I had done it. My tub and some of the floor were in my downstairs neighbor's bathroom. Picking off bits of debris, I struggled to my feet and stepped out into the living room. A single mother named Naomi lived here with 2 toddlers. I had never talked to her, but had a brief interaction with her son, who asked me my name of all things. I knew they often spent the night at her baby daddy's house, once again Eliana's and Macy's gossip keying me in, and it held true tonight. The living room and bedroom were empty, and I was grateful. I tried to hurry, as my fall down the floor wasn't exactly silent, and if anything else was out there, it surely heard. I rushed down the hallway in long strides, trying not to look, but there were details you could not but notice. A section of brick wall had discolored monochrome black and white and back to faded red. I didn't stop to observe. I had to keep moving. Only once I came upon several blood-stained doors did my pace slow. But I didn't stop. I tried to not think about the people who lived there or what had happened to them, but by now the apartment should have been full of the sounds of life instead of the bleak, oppressive silence I was drowning in. I made it to the stairs and practically leaped down an entire flight of stairs to the 2nd floor. Blood pumping and confidence high, I was running now. This hallway was warped like the one on the 4th floor, but in much more extreme ways. The walls had not only narrowed, but they were slanted, warping and turning at an angle with every foot, until the hallway was nearly spiraled. I had to slow to a stop to get my bearings, as it was all so dizzying. The floor beneath my feet ceased to be shitty Fox wood laminate and was instead a smooth stone that felt almost slippery. The brick walls had melted away to some mottled and stringy maroon cloth, thrown over what looked to be grating made of the same smooth stone. It looked almost organic, but at the same time, it could have been fabric. The thick dangling strands made me think of sea anemone tendrils, and I shuddered at the thought of touching them. So I forced myself to run once more, past an open door to a room that had a body perfectly bisected and sprawled out on the floor. The pile of intestines between the 2 halves writhing and rising into the air. It freaked me out enough that I ran past the next open door with my eyes shut tight. It was Harold's room, and I feared seeing what had become of him. I thought mercy was on my side as the hallway eventually straightened out, and the next 6 doors were shut. But as I came up to the last doors that lined the hallway, the one to my left flung open with incredible force. Flayed hands from a black void reached out to grab at me, and I pivoted out of the way just before they made contact. But I couldn't stop my momentum and went stumbling onto the cold, slippery floor. I tried scrambling back up as the door to my right opened, and from it, Sarah Palmer emerged. I knew it was her despite her corrupted form, flayed and covered in sinewy tumor-like growths. The severely obese woman had merged into her mobility scooter, and she used it to move forward. Slav flesh made it difficult as it had wrapped around the wheels, but still, it inched forward. The center of her abdomen had split open into a gaping hole, and with a quiver and a moan, it erupted with some vile bile-like fluid as it vomited a small figure out onto the floor before me. The newly birthed child got up at the same time I did and followed me in my panicked rush down the rest of the hallway and onto the stairway. The toddler-sized thing made of diseased and partially digested sinew was fast shrieked like a joyous child as it closed the gap between us with a leap. It was my turn to shriek as I tried shaking it off. As it scaled up my back towards my shoulder, I took hold of the thing with my hands and pried it off. The flesh was gelatinous and my fingers suck into it in ways that made my stomach churn. "Tag, you're it," the thing said in a voice I thought was vaguely familiar. Disgust drove me to fling it at the wall with all the force I could muster and its body crunched and splattered on impact with the wall that had reverted back to normal. It let out a small pained groan as it slid off the wall into the floor. As I ran by, it spoke in an agonized whisper that I could not read from my mind no matter how much I try. "Chris, why?" "I just wanted to play," it said, and I had to stifle a heaving gasp as I cleared the flight of stairs into the first-floor lobby. The only child who knew my name here was Naomi's son. They weren't supposed to be here, not tonight. They had always left on weeknights to their father's house. Had Naomi called off the attempts of reconciliation off tonight of all nights? Or had this begun earlier than I had thought? I didn't know and wouldn't ponder it until I was out of this nightmare. The lobby was normal by all means except for the lack of lights, but now the darkness did nothing to deter me. The exit was right there and I ran towards it. The double glass doors froze me in place, not because they were bolted, but because of what lay beyond. Pitch dark world where nothing could be seen, except for the momentary brilliance brought out by flashes of lightning ripped across the sky like whips made of TV static. In those moments I saw them, a line of things just waiting for me to step out. One was a smooth-skinned pale humanoid with a hole right through its chest that leaked inky black fluid. It had no face. Another was a tangle of violet tendrils that appeared to be made of smaller writing strands. Then there was one that was a massive, looming serpentine, thin, dotted with eyes the size of human heads, each iris alien in shape, and one end that I assumed to be its head was tusked with mandibles that must have been 6 feet in length. There were dozens of others, but their forms were too varied, too abstract to ever accurately describe. What drew my attention the most was the many puddles and stains of crimson at their feet, and scraps of clothing, one of them obviously being Macy's distinctive denim jacket. One work boot lay on its side, one I thought might have belonged to a maintenance worker. I would not be leaving, not here. I tried to comfort myself by telling myself that whatever was keeping me here wasn't letting them in, but it wasn't reassuring in any measure. I ended up crawling underneath the shitty lobby desk and curling up into a ball for what felt like hours. It could have been longer for all I know, but nothing mattered in that moment. I was fucked. Only when I heard the sound of a procession shuffling by did I stir. Peeking out from my hiding place, I saw them, the robed figures, 6 of them now. Upon their shoulders, they bore the weight of a marble slab, and upon it, a huddled figure. I watched them, backs to me, shuffle down the room and into the hallway that led to the manager's office. I tried sulking out as silently as possible to bear witness to the ritual that was about to unfold. The bearers lowered themselves in the slab, and as light gleamed across it, I realized who it was. The body was bent back into itself until it formed a circle. The belly was pointed out to the world, the back and spine contorted and twisted, the eyes empty. But goddamn the mouth, Harold was grinning ear to ear in an expression of pure ecstasy. The chanting began then, as the flung back and twisted glare of Harold's body lay upon me. Strange throaty vocalizations, deep and reverberating and inhuman. The sound of a mountain splitting apart or 2 worlds coming together. The vibrational forces of the universe melted away a border that kept the background machinations of a reality unseen. Somehow I knew this, that we had been pulled into this nightmare, but by what or who I still didn't know. They continued the hum chants until the space in front of them began to ripple like water. And when they ceased, so did the distortion. Half a heartbeat passed before it shattered like glass, and beyond it a massive eye. I flinched, hoping it didn't see me. But if it did, it must have not cared, since it retreated back into the darkness before it hauled itself out. A spindly arachnid leg covered in jagged angles and spines stepped out, followed by another and another, until a towering pinwheeled monstrosity of legs and appendages emerging from a central core stood before the cultists. An eye with concentric pupils was at its center, and the rest of it radiated out like a sea urchin. Every aspect of it told of the agonies it could inflict. It looked like pain incarnate, with the sheer amount of sharp corners and serrated spines. Every inch of its being was meant to cause harm, and the longer I looked at it, the more detail came to me. Hooks and scythe ends, tendrils laden with hungry, gnashing mouths. The thing that stood out the most was the way it distorted the space around it. Though it was within a confined space, as I gazed upon it, seemed to expand the air around it, so that some hidden aspect of itself could be felt. This was a part of a much larger whole, and I got the impression that some massive hands on a cosmic scale held this thing out before us, and yet they were one and the same. I looked away, not wanting to gaze upon this abomination, this emanation of pain any longer. It spoke in an alien language then, a sound so vile like a rusty nail being dragged along my eardrums and corneas. But I understood it. Unmistakable gratitude. I slunk back into my hiding spot and waited for it to be over. Waited for them to leave, and they did. Moving through the hallway, past the stairs into the basement laundromat, and into the community room. It's been hours since and they've still not emerged. I took the time to try to silently rummage around and in the manager's office. Next to a pile of fine pulp of flesh that had still Mr. Roderick's weeping face, our landlord, an axe. I picked up, knowing it would be of no use to me should I face those cultists or the pain entity. What I did know is that Harold had a role to play in this in some way or another, and that his room was just a floor above. If there's any chance of escape or answers, it would be there. If you don't hear back from me, I'm dead. I'm certain that there's no way anyone from outside this hell can help. Even then, I still ask that you'll wish me luck. I certainly know I'll need it. Part 3. Rochester Heights had always been a hellhole. I know that now. I never doubted that some of the people here were assholes, but in the time I've had to reflect, I realize how either indigent or cruel they were to each other. Maybe when people group together like that with no goal beyond inhabitants, unpleasant things arise. I lamented once that to them I was nothing but a sulking shadow, only half remembered. Once my landlord had forgotten, I even lived there and sent Tony to get the place ready for a new tenant. Now, I'm not so sure I mind as much. Being one of the forgotten ones might have saved my life. I was ready for the horrors of the second-floor hallway, meeting the grasping hands with an overhead axe swing that nearly severed one hand at the wrist. Pulling back, I used the butt end to smash away another grasping hand until I could slip past them. Sarah Palmer was next, swiveling around in her mobility scooter to face me, but it was too late. The heel of the axe sunk into flesh soft as putty, and as I yanked the axe loose, half her face sloughed off. I heard her chuckle as I ran past. Something was burning in me. Even if I died here, I had to know the what and how of Rochester's descent into madness. Harold's room door was still ajar, and I made sure to bolt the door the moment I ran in. Only then did I slowly turn around. I thought it was graphory at first. I had read about it one late night, a disorder most often associated with schizophrenics. The incoherent ramblings written and spoken. The living room floor and adjacent floor contained countless sharp-edged sigils and glyphs. They looked occultic in their configurations, but the actual characters themselves were completely foreign. Dead center at the circle was free of the scrawl but stained with brownish-red blood. I knew it was where Tony had found Harold's body. There was a journal left on the coffee table, and flipping through I confirmed that it was his. In the few minutes I had in that room, I didn't have much time to really understand its contents. And though I still have it, and I've spent hours since poring over it, I've only been able to come up with a rudimentary understanding of what Harold was onto. I'll summarize it here the best I can. Harold moved back in with his mother after an episode that cost him his job a year prior. They lived off her social security checks, and he deeply resented her for her advanced age. Every day she'd wake up with less of her mind intact. He was also having issues with extreme sexual frustration and began clinging delusionally to Joanne's politeness as a signal that she wanted him. The confrontation with her boyfriend Carter was the breaking point. It wasn't the reason why he did all this, but it was the final straw. But he had reason to resent everyone here, and he detailed all his grievances, big and small. I learned then the difference between being someone pushed to the wayside but still scrutinized with an eye of assumed threat like Harold, and being forgotten altogether, like me. In his pages upon pages of detailed slights, never once did my name come up. My existence failed to register to someone who was uncomfortably similar. It made me feel bitter, and I don't know why. Then there was talk of what he dubbed the background world. I still don't quite understand what it is and its purpose, but that's the thing that ties this all together. I'll let Harold explain in his own words. I first saw it in a dream, then a vision. It started with a tusked worm taking a bite out of the thin air, and like a scalloped finger, it peeled back what I thought was real to show me the machinations that ran behind what could be seen. Two places within the same space, but never allowed to touch or interact. As above and below, and from below to above, everything is mirrored. If it exists here in our layer, it exists below, within the background world. That was the first rule it told me, the most important for creating an interest where we can finally meet. The second rule is that for an autarch to touch the human domain, something must be offered to it. A life or part of one. Most often the offering is someone else. The greater the offering, the more an autarch can manipulate the human domain as long as it's within its sphere of influence. The most powerful offerings are oneself, a year of your life, or the greatest joy you'll ever feel. The greatest offer one can make to an autarch is your own life. There's more. He mentions that the autarch he's in contact with is one that operates within the sphere of agony. Pain is its domain, and Harold knew pain is better than most. The best I can piece together is that somehow he came into contact with this entity. Maybe it preyed on him for being vulnerable, or maybe its influence scrambled his thoughts, or maybe what he learned was too much for any mind to bear without consequence. I say this because I don't believe that Harold was crazy, ill, and in need of help, but there are enough commonalities in the strange runic language and his journaling that it feels as if he was truly uncovering something. He was not a stark raving madman, at least not until he let himself sink deeper into the influence of what had been encircling him. He spent the week leading up to the fateful night of his death preparing for Rochester's fall into the background world. 16 fetishes were placed around the apartment to mark the boundary for where the autarch would lift the veil and let our worlds merge. 6 of them were made from parts of his mother, the rest from strays and pets around the apartment. The last of them was Mrs. Lawrence's dog in the laundromat, mirrored above and below. Even if they were removed, they still created something in the background world that sanctioned this hell. Harold lamented that he never placed one in the basement below it, and that was my chance. Maybe, just maybe, the building was only partially within the interstice, and if I could make it to the second basement and emerge, it would be into the outside I had always known. Or maybe I'd step right into the background world. Regardless, I had no choice but to try. I scrounged around the apartment and found that Harold was a heavy drinker with a taste for cheap vodka. I fashioned 5 Molotovs with what he had and started the trek back down to the first floor. Stepping into the hallway, I was greeted by them, the conjoined endlessly fucking monstrosity that had started this. I greeted them with a sprinter's launching bolt and an axe swing. The sight of Carter's and Joanna's faces took the blow, and though the flesh came away in a huge chunk, and I heard the clinking of teeth splattering across stone floors, they didn't even flinch. Carter tried lunging at me, arm outstretched, but I flung myself against the wall and was trying to slip behind them. They pivoted around to try to face me, but the strange distribution of their weight made them cumbersome, and the fear I felt was gone. Another axe swing sunk deep into compromised muscle and bone and cleaved through them far easier than uncorrupted tissues. It was enough to nearly decapitate them, and they let out this horrible wheezing gasp. Another lunging grasp was met with an axe blow that sent nearly half his fingers skipping across the ground, and one last swing to their neck finished it. Though their head was on the floor before me, they did not die. What remained of their face was opening and closing its mouth, and I could see that the destroyed cheek was starting to restructure and regenerate. This truly was hell, willed into existence by a resentful heart. The body didn't fall, and wasn't still either, jerking and twitching about. It eventually started grasping towards its head. I had the Molotov lit by the time it took hold of its neck and thrown in the moment it lifted it up. They erupted into a ball of fire, and I swore I heard screaming, as if some part of their warped mind registered what had just occurred, and I hoped that the fire would be enough to put an end to them. The second Molotov was thrown into the corner where Sarah and the hands tried and failed once more to apprehend me. I was going to burn this place down if I could. Maybe then I would be able to spare them. The third was thrown atop the lobby desk. The last 2 were for the laundromat. I didn't know if the building would actually burn, but I wanted to cause some harm, to do anything. The mad dash to the laundry was the fastest I've ever run. I'm sure of it. I was certain that the commotion and the fires would have caused the autarch and its cultists to emerge from management's office, but nothing ever impeded my flight down the stairs into the laundry room. I landed on soft floors, and the lights now were dim and blood red. But even then I saw the horror that lay before me. A pulsating mass. A conglomerate of flesh formed at the center of the room, and it stretched out across the floor, walls, and machines. Every inch was living tissue and sinews, nerves, blood vessels, all of it. A dozen limbs raked and reached out at open air weakly, and I swore they had some identifying features. A watch that could have belonged to Josie from the 7th floor. A sleeve of a distinctive neon green sweater from Kiana, a college student. I didn't need another reason. The 4th Molotov was thrown on the fleshy floor behind me, and the final directly at the tumor. The dark was eclipsed by the burning sun that stood behind me. The threshold of the sub-basement and my hopeful exit was before me now, but I hesitated for a moment. The heat licked at my spine and my eyes watered at the rising smoke. If I was wrong, I would be fucked. But I'd be fucked fire or not. I moved forward, and the moment my foot touched the first step, the world behind me plunged back into darkness as the fire extinguished. In an instant it all ceased, the heat, the smoke. A curtain of silence fell and a wave of dread rose. I knew I shouldn't have looked back, but I couldn't help myself. With a thundering heart, I threw my gaze back and saw it. The autarch of agony that had caused all this goaded and tempted Harold with its promise of pain to all he hated. The center of its eye blossomed before me and grew to encompass all before it in its vision. Yes, it was a vision that it showed me. Screams around me rose to a crescendo as the tumor grew to the size of the apartment itself, a living edifice. And yet it still paled in size compared to the autarch who looked down on it. The countless tendrils in their instruments of torture reached down to the tower of flesh, and it raked and sliced and tore and ate, and it all grew back. It would continue so, for eternity. That was a dark wish of Harold. The thing began to bulge and split apart, a perfect copy of its spherical form, mitosis. This thing could split itself, and that's how it planned to fulfill its promise and continue to operate without being bound to it. I screamed, or I think I did, because when I was able to pry my eyes away from it to look around, I saw the shadow of my exit, the descent into the sub-basement. I ran, refusing to look back. I couldn't look back. So into the murky depths I went. I had been in the sub-basement once before. Small and damp, it had only a few fold-up tables and chairs. There were no entries or exits except a single narrow staircase and a seldom-used door, leftovers from a bygone era. It was barred and locked at all times, but the door was old, wooden, and I was certain it would only take a good kick to break it down. But what lay before me was not the basement. No, it was some dark plane of reality that could not have been the background world. I had seen brief glimpses of it just outside my window, and this was different. Narrow and claustrophobic, but at the same time impossibly expansive. Light did not exist here. Even when I tried my lighter, the air around me wicked away a Lua mansion. I reached out to touch concrete walls and found that I was in a tunnel. With no other option, I walked and walked until time ceased to have meaning. I know I must have been there for hours, since hunger and exhaustion forced me to rest. But comfort was impossible, so after a few minutes I got back up and pushed forward. When at last I came upon an exit dimly illuminated, it hurt my eyes that had been bathed in darkness for so long. A shallow staircase that led down to the sub-basement I had always known. The door was there, and with a frenzied kick it fell away, and I burst out to the world above with a half scream of joy and a half maddened sob. It was midday and Rochester Heights did not exist anymore. I had emerged from a sub-basement into an empty, overgrown lot. A homeless man nearby turned to glare at me momentarily before returning to whatever he was doing. Nothing exists of my ordeal, and no one even remembers Rochester Heights. I've done searches on the residents, and it's like they don't exist. Everything and everyone marked by the agony autarch have ceased to exist meaningfully, or have been rewritten out of history. I found Macy's mother and called to ask about her daughter, and she swore to me she never had children. The company that owns the lot told me it's been unoccupied and on the market for half a year. I've not been the same since my escape from Rochester Heights. There's so much left in this goddamn journal, but every time I look at it, I get this sense of overwhelming doom. There's so many questions. If what exists below is reflected above, and vice versa, how's the world changed? Now, as a speaker, there's a tower of flesh that rises high above the world below, and it casts its long shadow into the world above. And I shudder to think at how it will manifest. I know Rochester Heights has cast its shadow over me, darkened my heart one way or another. The people there didn't deserve what happened to them. And Harold deserved better, but in hatred or love their gaze eluded me. Once I resented that, but now I find solace in it. The nightmares will never end, and I will never be okay. But at least any that casts its hateful gaze upon our world will see nothing but a shadow in my place. The night I met Santa Claus. It has been said that you should never meet your idols. It was the Christmas of 2005 that I came face to face with mine. Someone the majority of people don't believe in, after a certain age, of course.
I was 10 years old at the time and still held on to my beliefs, regardless of the inherent mocking it would earn. Joanna, my older sister, Jo or Jojo to her friends and family, outright laughed at my insistence the man in the hat was real, but she was always a logical thinker. Even when she was much younger, while I was only 3 or 4, she rolled her eyes at my excitement about the arrival of jolly old Saint Nick, having never bought into it even when she was just a little girl, according to our dad. That's fine, I thought. Don't matter if you believe in him, 'cause he believes in you. Not the most well-thought-out inner argument, but it was good enough for an imaginative kid who couldn't stand the thought of his sister ending up with a stocking full of coal, even if she was being a jerk about the whole thing. When that December dragged by at a snail's pace, or so it felt to a kid eagerly anticipating whatever new goodies may be awaiting him on the morning of the 25th, I forged together my plan to prove her wrong once and for all. Sure, I can't deny that the satisfaction of having a well-deserved "I told you so" to greet Jo on Christmas morning wasn't at least a little bit behind my motivations, but I also couldn't resist the opportunity to meet the fabled jolly man in the red suit. My dad chuckled at my insistence that I would be camping out in the living room that night of the 24th, while my mom only shrugged with a smile. "Just be sure to get some sleep, kiddo," Dad said, still laughing at my eagerness mixed with exhausted yawns. I held the small camera I'd received a Christmas or two back, clutched in my hand beneath the blanket, prepared to take a few shots as soon as Saint Nick made his appearance. But as the house fell still, I found it far more difficult to keep my eyes open. While the couch wasn't nearly as comfortable as my bed on the second floor, the excitement of the season, along with a good deal of playing out in the snow, left my eyelids far too heavy to battle against. I can't be certain how long I was out for, with only the lights from the tree illuminating the living room around me. But when the creaking of the floor and jingling of the decorations hanging from the tree caused me to stir back to awareness, I instantly felt my fingers tingle with anticipation. For my plan to prove fruitful, I would have to keep up the act of a sleeping child, one fully unaware of the visitor I could vaguely see through my half-shut eyes. From the angle I was laying in, I could only make out from the waist down of the man who fished goodies from his hefty bag, laying them gently beneath the tree. But I had no doubt I was witnessing the actions of the very man I hoped to see. With his back to me, I softly but hastily searched my fingertips around for the camera which had fallen from their grip after I knocked out, but I attempted to keep my actions unnoticed. I slightly gasped aloud when my hand wrapped around the plastic shell, causing the man by the tree to spin in place, almost catching me red-handed. I snapped my eyes back shut, rolling them from side to side beneath their lids to imitate the rapid eye movement I had read about online. Whether or not I was overdoing it, acting as though I were erratically scanning them in every direction while still firmly closed, I had no way of knowing. But when I felt the air shift as the man drew closer to where I lay, I found it more difficult to hide my excitement. I breathed in the scent of freshly baked cookies and peppermint, convincing me that I truly was in the presence of the fabled gift-giver himself. There was something else beneath the more inviting smells, something musty and aged, but I assumed the big guy had worked up quite a sweat, given his laborious profession. After a few moments, I felt the oxygen around me regulate as the light footsteps sounded as though they moved away from me again, so I took a chance on cracking open my eyelids. Sure enough, the man in the red suit was hunched over by the tree again. I knew I had to make it quick, or I would lose this small window of providing evidence to my sister. In one swift but silent motion, I pulled the camera free from my blanket, aimed it at the man who still faced the tree, and snapped 3 pictures back to back, moving my finger so quickly I didn't have time to register the bright flash. I felt my breath catch in my throat as he spun to face me, something I could barely make out through the lingering effects of the blinking bright lights on my eyes, which had grown accustomed to an otherwise darkened room. "That's against the rules, little boy," his deep voice said with his posture unchanged from what I could tell. I'm so sorry, I stuttered, feeling my eyes well up. I just wanted to prove to my sister that you're real. You're not the first, unlikely to be the last, but it is still forbidden, I'm afraid. I could see the silhouette rising back to his feet, with the blotches of lingering light still blocking most of my view. He moved closer to where I lay, only slightly raised with the camera clenched between my trembling fingers. It wasn't fear that caused my extremities to shiver, but that sensation of guilt and embarrassment from being caught doing something I shouldn't have. Were this any other man, I would likely be so scared that I couldn't even form the stuttered words I managed to utter. But I was comfortable in the fact that Father Christmas would never harm a child, regardless of how naughty they were acting. "Give it to me," he said, holding his padded mitt just beneath my face. I gently raised the camera, placing it in his waiting hand, keeping my guilt-ridden gaze fixed on my wrinkled blanket. "There's nothing to feel bad about, my boy," he said, sliding the camera into his pocket with one hand and tousling my hair with the other. "Go back to sleep now." But, will I mean, does this make me naughty?" "No, young Mr. Cobb, you have graced my nice list exclusively for years," he said with a hearty chuckle. "I was a curious child myself once, so very long ago." Finally feeling comfortable enough to raise my eyes to meet those of the man who stood beside the couch, I found my voice silenced when I met his smiling face. While things were still somewhat out of focus from the lingering effects of the camera flash, what I saw through the haze was far from what I expected. Whether it was the fact that the skin tone of the left side of the face was not the same as the right, the green and red threads holding the mismatched flaps of skin together, or the two different colors and sizes of the eyes were what caught me more off guard, I didn't know. Whatever aspect of this crudely priced together thing, for lack of a better term, I was certain that this could not truly be who I had expected a visit from this snowy Christmas morning. As my jaw fell open, a scream caught in my throat as the creature in the red suit swiftly and firmly placed a hand over my mouth. Now, he said, smiling so widely that a few stitches popped where his mouth was hemmed on the left side. "There's no sense in allowing your curiosity to wake everyone else in the house." I was frozen when the sight of this patchwork man caused my guilt to be replaced with a fear I had never known. My whole body trembled as the one green and one hazel eye glared into mine. Tears were streaming down my face and over the padded glove that rested over my mouth, while my mind fought to wrap around what I was looking at. "There's nothing to fear, my boy," he said, winking the brown eye, his words now accompanied by a whistle through the gap on the side of his mouth. "I may not look as you imagined, but I assure you, I am who you sought to meet this night." What are you?" I asked, pulling the hand from my mouth with my shivering fingers. "You know who I am, Edward." "No, you can't be." I shook my head almost violently as I pushed my shoulder blades against the back of the couch, as though this would somehow grant me freedom from this hideous thing. The smile faded from the patchy bearded face as those opposing eyes glared down at me. While he hung his head, turning away from me, he strolled to my father's recliner, which sat diagonally across from where I lay. When he spun again to face me, lowering himself into my dad's favorite chair, we just glared at one another, my eyes still filled with terror, and his with something resembling shame. "I have been doing this for a long time, Edward," he said in a strangely compassionate voice. "Immortality, I can assure you, does not come without cost. You can't be him." "I won't believe it," I said, still shaking my head in denial. "I am young Mr. Cobb. I am so sorry that I am not what you expected, but I assure you there is no need to be afraid. I would never hurt a child. Not even the naughty ones. Not when they're still young enough to change anyway. Even if
If they're really bad? Number not ever. Never a child. Not if I can help it. Besides, that's what the train is for. The train? Nothing to concern yourself with, my boy. I can promise you that much. Again, we gazed at one another for so long that my eyes began to burn from my refusal to blink. Not only was I still so horrified by what sat across from me, but I dreaded to think what he might have done if I took my eyes off him for a second. My whole body continued to tremble while I still forced my back against the plush cushions of the couch, with my blanket pulled up to my quivering lower lip. Every fiber of my being was in complete denial of what I was looking at, regardless of the fact he clearly had no ill intentions at the time. A fact I grew steadily more uncertain of after what came next. "Stop looking at me like that," he said, barely louder than a whisper, both sides of his uneven brow pinching tightly on his upper eyelids. I didn't stop. I couldn't. I had no control over it at the time. He may as well have asked me to levitate 3 feet above the cozy sofa with how much I was able to manage what my body and mind were going through at the time. "Stop it," he repeated, leaning forward to lean his elbows on his knees. "Do you have any idea what I have endured over the centuries? Do you have the slightest semblance of appreciation for what I put myself through to continue to give you ungrateful children a happy Christmas?" I shook my near-spasming head, not in response to his question, but in further denial of what I was witnessing. "I turned myself into an abomination for you, you and all of the other kids out there. Is that not good enough?" I turned away from him, finally allowing my gaze to drift from his. "Look at me," he shouted, reclaiming my unyielding attention, as he practically leapt to his feet, whipping the hat from his scalp and tearing open his coat. The scars and stitched together, mismatched shades of flesh across his emaciated chest almost caused me to scream out so loudly, I may just wake the dead, as well as my sleeping family. The stringy and matted, patchwork hair and mangled scalp looked as though the thread holding it together would pop apart any second, unzipping the seams to reveal little more than the skull beneath. "This is what I had to become to continue on my chosen path," he said in a cracking voice, pulling his coat back shut. "I became this monstrosity for you, for all of the children of the world." He paced closer to me again, inspiring me to attempt to force myself deeper into the cushions. As he crouched down to look directly into my eyes, my tears let loose, transforming from the trickling stream to a veritable hurricane. "Stop. That." He gripped his fingers around my shoulders so tightly, I thought he planned to claim my arms, to stash them away for a rainy day. While I became aware of the fact that one of the hands felt so much larger than the other, far stronger as well, that only drove the madness of it all so much deeper into my brain. "Look at the wonders I brought you," he said, removing one hand to gesture to the pile of neatly wrapped presents. "Is it too much to expect a little gratitude?" The mismatched scowl softened to reveal his own glassy eyes, glistening in the soft illumination of the festive lights upon the tree. In that moment, even through my horror-stricken vision at the time, I could finally make out the melancholy and hurt-filled expression of the kind face, hidden away behind the grotesque patchwork flesh. Thank you," I said, my tears finally dissipating. "And I'm sorry. Sorry I got scared. It's just—" "No," he said, his grip softening on my shoulder. "It is I who should apologize, my dear young man." His hands fell limp to his sides, tracing his padded gloves across the carpeted floor. As he hung his head, shying his eyes away from mine, I let the blanket slip from my fingers, raising my hand to his cold and wrinkled cheek. "It actually feels kinda neat," I said, running my no longer shivering digits across the seam, holding the upper flap of his face to the lower. "Does it hurt?" He just shook his head, still seemingly studying the floor beneath his knees. "Only at first. Goes numb after a time. I bet that's a good thing when it's really cold out."
I said sincerely, shifting myself closer to him. I played in the snow today, and my skin felt like it was on fire after a while. Is that right? He said with a chuckle, raising his eyes back to meet mine. It has been a long time since I felt anything like that. It really sucked, 'cause I wanted to stay out there, but I couldn't even make my fingers move. They were so cold. When I came back inside, I got crazy pins and needles. Though the smile he returned seemed to lighten up his face, a few more stitches popped loose on the side of his mouth, almost reawakening the fear I had begun to bury away. When he raised a gloved hand to the loose thread, I could see that shame returning as he turned his gaze from mine once more. Want me to help you fix it? My mom showed me how to sew a bit when I kept tearing up the knees of my pants. No, he said, with a half smile on the side of his mouth that wasn't affixed with thread. But I certainly do appreciate the offer, young Edward. With that, he got back to his feet, smiled back down at me once more, and walked back to where his bag lay beside the tree. I'm afraid I must be going, my young friend. Many more children on my list before the sun rises. I pulled back my blanket, jumped to my feet, and approached the man in the red suit, no longer afraid of what he had in store for me. I really am sorry, Santa, I said, feeling my back tense again from my guilt. No, my boy, he said, turning to face me. It is I who owes you an apology. It has been many years since I have allowed this, he held his hands to his face, to be seen by anyone, aside from those I work alongside. I almost forgot how jarring it can be to the unsuspecting. I reached up to wrap my fingers around the puffy mitten of his left hand. He winced at first, as though shocked by this act, but when I tightened my grip to reassure him, I felt my heart skip a little when my hand closed around the empty section of padding. I looked up at him, as though wordlessly asking if it was all right before I slipped the glove from his hand. I felt my jaw fall loose when my eyes met the sight of the 3 missing fingers, leaving only a forefinger and thumb in their stead. What happened? I stuttered, not from fear this time, but from the sadness awakening within me. A small accident some weeks back, he said, almost dismissively. Nothing to worry about, young lad. Can you get new ones? Soon enough, my boy. I just need the right donor, he replied with a warm smile. But you said you wouldn't hurt nobody, I said, feeling my heartbeat quicken again. I would never hurt a child, dear Edward, he said, pulling the mitten back over his hand. But a few lumps of coal are not quite as effective to a naughty adult. With that, he gave me a wink, tousled my hair again with his fully fingered right hand, and picked the large bag back up again. You'd better get some sleep now. While I was still pretty freaked out by everything that night had presented me with, I no longer felt afraid of the patchwork man in the red and white suit. Before I walked back to the couch, I wrapped my arms around him, apologizing one last time for acting like such a jerk. He just laughed, gently returning my hug. Merry Christmas, Edward Cobb, he said with a slight crack in his voice. Merry Christmas, Santa, I replied, finally releasing my grip to head back to my warm blanket. When I climbed back under the covers, I glanced back to the tree to see no trace of jolly old Saint Nick, but I think I expected that. I heard no hooves stomping across the roof, high above, no jovial chuckles as he rode out of earshot, only the silence of the house at rest. By the time I awoke the following morning, greeted by my loving parents, excited sister, and a good many presents to open up, I had already convinced myself that I had eaten far too much junk food the night before. That was always a safe enough explanation for my more bizarre and far-out dreams. I even found my camera hidden away beneath the blanket, with not even one picture having been taken. After Christmas morning proceeded like normal. Well, normal from what I had experienced over my handful of years by that point, my father received a phone call. He looked almost puzzled when he glanced at the caller ID before answering, but the confused expression on his face quickly turned to something more concerned and uneasy. He whispered to my mother words I could not make out, causing her face to mimic his at the time, but he turned down her offer to accompany him as he threw on some warmer clothing, almost sprinting out the front door. "Where's Dad going?" Jo asked, turning her attention away from her new iPod for the first time in hours. "He has to go meet your Uncle Bob," Mom replied, appearing uneasy about this rendezvous. I had only met my father's brother once, some 4 or 5 years before that Christmas day, if memory serves. Even back then, I could tell that my mom didn't think too highly of the man, but he was only at the house for maybe 10 to 20 minutes at most. I overheard my parents arguing that night, with my mother insisting that Dad's brother was not welcome in our home. While Dad seemed pretty agitated by her words, he didn't put up as much of a fight as I expected, but the more they talked, after the yelling calmed down, the more I understood. I would find out sometime later that Robert Cobb, who was 2 years older than my dad, cared more about the bottle than his brother's family. He prioritized his addiction over his own wife and kids as well, for that matter. Having only met him that one time, I had no idea I had 3 cousins. A boy around my age and 2 daughters, 3 and 5 years my senior. With those facts in mind, when my dad showed back up 2 hours later, accompanied by Uncle Bob, I could understand why my mom looked fit to burst. As my father looked back at her with his eyes quivering with burgeoning tears, she looked completely lost for words when Robert threw his arms around her, apologizing for being such a terrible brother-in-law. It was at that point, while I was completely distracted from all of the goodies I had unwrapped that morning, gazing up at the adults who were acting so strangely to my youthful eyes, that I noticed something that caused my breath to catch in my throat again. Some minutes later, Bob would explain the bandages wrapped around his left hand, how he had awakened that morning with a wide red ribbon where the gauze now sat, being still hung over from the binge drinking of the previous night, the same way he had ended just about every day since his wife left him, taking their children with her. He had no memory of how he had lost those 3 fingers, nor why he had encased the bloodied stumps in a festive ribbon. Seeing this as a much-needed wake-up call to finally put in the work to attempt to get his life back on track, he headed straight to the hospital, placing the call to my father when he arrived. When my parents escorted him into the kitchen, pretty much ordering my sister and me to stay put, we couldn't help but listen from the other side of the door. Though I was still far too young to truly understand a lot of what was being said, what Uncle Bob was confessing to, Jo attempted to explain it to me later in more child-friendly terms. Essentially, Robert admitted to the abuse he had inflicted on his wife and children. While he had only gotten physical with his spouse, he was just as ashamed of that as the years of verbal abuse. Over the following months, my father stood by his brother's side while he fought to get clean, with the full support of my mom. Sometime down the line, his estranged wife gave him a second chance. Ultimately, they could not save their relationship, but remained friends, even when she remarried. He would, however, become far more involved in the lives of his children, as well as his niece and nephew. To this day, Uncle Bob keeps in touch. I don't see him as much as I used to, him or my cousins, but that's just part of getting older, I suppose. We all still get together for Thanksgiving and Christmas, the latter being more important to my uncle than any other holiday, as that is the anniversary of when he realized the monster he had become. Oftentimes, I allow myself to believe that the memories I still hold of the man I met that early Christmas morning are nothing more than an especially vivid dream that sticks with me to this day. The fact that the patchwork individual in the red suit was missing the same fingers my uncle lost track of some hours after that bizarre dream, I just chalked up to that unexplainable coincidence of a strangely prophetic flight of fancy of the sleeping mind. Of course, there are those other times when I fully and truly believe that I did uncover the truth behind the mythical saint of the season, the extreme measures he took to be able to continue his mission through the centuries. Not only that, but I think it is very likely he had a fully fingered left hand by the time the sun set on that Christmas day. Though I never saw him again after that night, I believe it was that experience that drove me to at least attempt to grow up to be a good man. That, as well as the lessons my parents taught me. Yes, there have been hard times that almost inspired me to stray from that path, as life does tend to toss a few curveballs at even the most prepared for the worst. But I have always been able to find my way back. Perhaps it's not the most honorable motivation, the fear of having bits and pieces of myself cut and stripped away to fix up a broken fender or two on Santa's sleigh, so to speak, but it's something at least. Believe my story or not, it's pretty far-fetched. I can't deny that. All I ask when all is said and done, just try to be good, for goodness sake.